Good evening, night owls. You're listening to WNMR Nocturnal Mysteries Radio, and I'm your host, Edward Cronkite. The coffee's fresh, the storm's picking up outside, and my inbox is fuller than a cemetery on All Saints' Day. For those just tuning in, welcome to our little corner of the darkness. For my regular listeners, and I know you're out there, I can feel you in the static. You know what we're about here. Real stories from real people who've seen things that don't quite fit into the daylight world. Things that make you check your locks twice and sleep with the lights on. Tonight's theme came to me in a peculiar way. I was driving back from Millfield yesterday, had to pick up some equipment from a defunct station when I passed by Rosewood Memorial Gardens. You know the one with the wrought iron gates and the angels that seem to follow you with their stone eyes. Anyway, there was a hearse pulling out and the driver gave me this look. Not unfriendly, mind you, but knowing. Like he could see right through to the part of me that collects these dark tales. Got me thinking about the folks who work with the dead for a living. The funeral directors, the embalmers, the crematorium operators. They spend their days in places where the living say goodbye and the dead, well, sometimes they don't want to let go. So I sent out a call last week. Asked my listeners who work in funeral homes, morgues, anywhere death does business, to share their experiences. And let me tell you, the responses have been illuminating. The first story comes from an email I received Tuesday morning. The sender asked me to call him Marcus, though I suspect that's not his real name. He worked, at a funeral home in small-town Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and secrets don't stay buried for long. Marcus wrote to me in the early hours of the morning, and I could feel his exhaustion bleeding through the screen. Let me read you what he shared. Edward, I've been listening to your show for about 6 months now. Never thought I'd be writing in, but after what happened last week, I can't sleep. Can't think about anything else. Maybe getting it out will help. I've been working at Hartwell & Sons Funeral Home for 3 years. It's a family business, been around since 1958. Old Mr. Hartwell started it after coming back from Korea. Said he'd seen enough young men die far from home and wanted to make sure families here could say proper goodbyes. His son runs it now, and I'm one of 2 full-time employees. The building itself is one of those old Victorian houses, converted sometime in the 70s. Original hardwood floors, high ceilings, the works. Beautiful in daylight, but after dark, well, every old building has its quirks, right? I work the night shift. Someone has to be there, you understand. Bodies come in at all hours, and families sometimes need access to the viewing rooms. Plus, there's the prep work, embalming, dressing, positioning for the next day's visitations. It's quiet work, peaceful mostly. The dead don't complain, don't argue about the color of their lipstick or whether their tie's straight. Or at least they didn't used to. 3 weeks ago, we had a woman brought in. Margaret Thornfield, 73 years old, died in her sleep, natural causes. Family was devastated but grateful it was peaceful. She was supposed to be cremated after a small service, nothing fancy. Mrs. Thornfield arrived on a Tuesday night. I was alone as usual when the transport service brought her in. Standard procedure, check the paperwork, get her settled in cold storage until I could begin prep the next evening. She was a small woman, probably hadn't weighed more than 90 pounds, soaking wet. Kind face, even in death. The kind of grandmother you'd see feeding pigeons in the park. I finished the paperwork around midnight and decided to grab a coffee. The break room is upstairs in what used to be the master bedroom of the original house. As I was walking up, I heard it. A voice. Quiet, but clear as day. Hello? Is someone there? I stopped cold. The voice was coming from downstairs, from the direction of the prep room. female voice, elderly. Now, I should mention that I've been in this business long enough to know that bodies make sounds. Gases escaping, muscles relaxing, vocal cords shifting. It's all perfectly natural. But this was different. It wasn't just a sound. It was words. I stood at the top of the stairs listening. Everything was quiet again. Just the hum of the refrigeration units in the old building settling. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, maybe picked up a CB radio transmission or something. These old buildings, you never know what kind of interference you might get. I got my coffee and headed back downstairs. As I passed the prep room, I glanced through the window. All the gurneys were empty. We'd moved Mrs. Thornfield straight to cold storage. Nothing out of place. I settled back at my desk to finish some paperwork, trying to push the voice out of my mind. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the viewing room adjacent to the prep area. This time, I couldn't dismiss it. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk. The overhead lights in the viewing rooms are on timers, and I didn't want to flood the place with light if there was actually an intruder inside. The viewing room was dark, empty, except for the rows of chairs facing the spot where we'd place the casket the next day for Mrs. Patterson's service. But as I swept the flashlight around, I saw them. Wet footprints on the carpet, small feet like a woman's, leading from the door to the front row of chairs, then back toward the prep room. My hands were shaking as I followed the trail. The prints were clear. Someone had walked through with bare, wet feet. But there was no one in the building except me. I'd checked every door, every window. The security system was armed. I followed the footprints back to the prep room, my heart hammering in my chest. The trail led directly to the cold storage area, to drawer number 3, where Mrs. Thornfield was supposed to be resting. I stood there for a long moment, flashlight beam wavering on the closed drawer. Part of me wanted to just walk away, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I had to know. The drawer slid open smoothly, with barely a whisper of sound. And there she was, Mrs. Thornfield, exactly as I'd left her. Body bag zipped, identification tag in place, but the bag was damp. Soaking wet on the outside like someone had hosed it down. I reached out with a trembling hand and touched the moisture. It was warm, body temperature warm. That's when I heard her voice again, clearer this time, coming from inside the bag. "I'm so cold. Please, I'm so very cold." I yanked my hand back and slammed the drawer shut, stumbled backward until I hit the wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The voice continued, muffled now but still audible. "Please don't leave me in here. It's so dark and I'm so cold." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran straight out of that building and didn't stop until I reached my car. Sat there in the parking lot for the rest of the night, watching the windows, waiting for dawn. When Mr. Hartwell arrived the next morning, I met him at the door. Told him there'd been a problem with the refrigeration unit for drawer 3, that he should check it before we began prep on Mrs. Thornfield. He gave me a strange look but went to investigate. I watched from the doorway as he opened the drawer. Mrs. Thornfield was there, exactly as she should be. Body bag dry, no sign of moisture anywhere. Mr. Hartwell checked the refrigeration unit and said it was working fine. Had been all night, according to the temperature logs. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. The service for Mrs. Thornfield went off without a hitch, closed casket as requested by the family. She was cremated that afternoon. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 nights later, we had another elderly woman brought in. Ruth Caldwell, 81, died of complications from pneumonia. Same routine, check the paperwork, get her settled in storage. I put her in drawer 5 as far from number 3 as possible. Everything was quiet until about 2 in the morning. I was doing paperwork when I heard it again. That same voice, soft and plaintive. "I'm cold, so very cold." This time, I didn't hesitate. I marched straight to cold storage and yanked open drawer 5. Ruth Caldwell was there, but like before, the body bag was damp and warm to the touch. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was the condensation on the inside of the drawer, where someone had traced words with their finger in the moisture. 5 words, spelled out in shaky letters. "Help me, I'm not dead." I slammed the drawer shut and called Mr. Hartwell at home. Told him I was sick, had to leave immediately. He wasn't happy, but he came in to cover the rest of my shift. The next morning I learned that Ruth Caldwell had been rushed to the hospital the night before. Her family had requested we hold off on any preparation, said they wanted to wait for some test results. Apparently there had been some confusion at the hospital about her condition when she was pronounced. She'd been in a deep coma, not dead at all. I quit that afternoon. Told Mr. Hartwell I'd found another job. Needed to start immediately. He was understanding, said he'd noticed I seemed stressed lately, gave me a good reference in my final paycheck. But I can't stop thinking about Mrs. Thornfield. If Ruth Caldwell wasn't actually dead, if the hospital made a mistake, what about Margaret? What if she was trying to tell me something? What if she was still alive when they put her in that drawer? I've driven past the crematorium twice since then. Each time, I swear I can see smoke rising from the chimney, even though they told the family her cremation was completed weeks ago. I don't sleep much anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice. "I'm so cold. Please, I'm so very cold." Edward, I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking, but I worked with the dead for 3 years, and I learned to tell the difference between what's natural and what's not. What happened in that funeral home wasn't natural. I just needed to tell someone who might believe me, who might understand that sometimes the line between life and death isn't as clear as we'd like to think. Thanks for listening. Marcus, if you're listening tonight, I want you to know that your story reached me. More than that, it reminded me why I do this show. Because sometimes the most terrifying experiences aren't the ones involving monsters or demons. Sometimes they're about the very human fear of being forgotten, abandoned, left behind in the cold and dark. The medical examiner's office reported 17 cases of incorrectly declared deaths in Ohio last year alone. 17 people who woke up in morgues, funeral homes, or were discovered moving during transport. Modern medicine is remarkable, but it's not infallible. Comas can mimic death, and in our rush to process the deceased, sometimes we miss the signs that life still flickers. But there's something else in Marcus's story that haunts me. The footprints, the messages in the condensation. If Mrs. Thornfield was truly dead, as all the paperwork indicated, then what was trying so desperately to communicate from that cold storage drawer? I've been in touch with the Hartwell & Sons funeral home. They confirmed that Marcus worked there briefly but was unwilling to discuss the circumstances of his departure. They did, however, mention that they've had to replace their refrigeration units twice in the past month. Both times, the units were found with extensive water damage from an unknown source. The rain's really coming down now, folks. Perfect night for stories like this one. It makes you think about all the souls out there, doesn't it? The ones who passed peacefully, surrounded by love, and the ones who might still be waiting, somewhere in the space between this world and the next, trying to tell us they're not quite ready to let go. We've got more stories coming your way tonight. Letters from morticians, crematorium operators, even a gentleman who works the night shift at the city morgue. Each one a reminder that death, for all our rituals and procedures, remains one of life's greatest mysteries. But first, let me share something with you. Last night, I received a call around 3 in the morning, static-filled, barely audible. A woman's voice, elderly and weak, saying only, "Please tell them I'm not ready. I'm so cold and I'm not ready." The line went dead before I could respond. When I tried to trace the call, the phone company said it originated from a number that's been disconnected for 6 months. A number that used to belong to Hartwell and Sons Funeral Home. Stay with us, night owls. We're just getting started, and the dead, it seems, have much more to say. Welcome back to WNMR, folks. I hope you didn't go anywhere during that last song. Sometimes the old blues help cleanse the palate between stories, don't you think? Like a sorbet course in a meal of dark tales. Speaking of dark tales, I've been getting messages all evening. Some of you are sharing your own experiences. Others are asking questions about Marcus's story. A listener named Sarah from Pittsburgh wants to know if I think Mrs. Thornfield was really trying to communicate from beyond. Another caller, didn't leave a name, said they used to work at a funeral home in Cleveland and had similar experiences with false deaths. But the message that's been nagging at me came in about an hour ago. A voicemail from someone who identified himself only as D. The connection was poor, filled with static. But what came through was clear enough. "Edward, I've been listening. That story about the funeral home, it reminded me of something. Something I've been trying to forget for 15 years. I'm an embalmer. Or was. Maybe you'll understand why that's past tense when you hear what I have to say." Now, D left a number, and I called him back during the previous segment. What he shared with me, well, it's the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about death and what comes after. Ladies and gentlemen, meet David Kessler, 48 years old, licensed embalmer with 22 years of experience. Until 3 years ago, he worked for Eternal Rest Mortuary Services in Bakersfield, California. A large operation. They served 4 counties and handled nearly 2,000 cases a year. David was their night shift supervisor. When families needed their loved ones prepared for viewings, David was the man who made it happen. He called it the final gift, ensuring that grief-stricken relatives could remember their deceased family members as they were in life, not as death had left them. But David learned something that no textbook teaches, no certification program covers. Sometimes, when you spend your nights alone with the dead start to respond to your touch. I got into this business because of my grandfather. He died when I was 12, and the mortician who prepared him, it was like a miracle. Grandpa had been sick for months, wasted away to almost nothing. But when we saw him in the casket, he looked peaceful, strong, like himself again. I wanted to give that gift to other families, the chance to say goodbye to the person they remembered, not the shell that disease or accident had left behind. Embalming is an art as much as a science. You have to understand facial structure, muscle composition, how different chemicals interact with various skin types. You're sculpting with flesh and formaldehyde, painting with cosmetics and careful lighting. It takes years to develop the touch, and I had it. By the time I'd been at Eternal Rest for a decade, I was handling their most challenging cases: accident victims, decomposition cases, elderly clients whose families wanted open casket services despite advanced illness. I could make a 90-year-old man look like he was sleeping peacefully after a good day's work. The night shift suited me. Fewer distractions, no families hovering, no funeral directors checking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. Just me, my tools, and the quiet work of restoration. I should have paid more attention to why the previous night's supervisor had quit so suddenly. It started small, little things I could easily dismiss. Bodies that seemed to shift position between when I left for a break and when I returned. Skin that felt warmer than it should after hours in refrigeration. Eyes that seemed to track movement even though I'd waited the lids closed. Professional hazard, I told myself. Work alone with the dead long enough and your mind starts playing tricks on you. Every embalmer has stories about corpses that seemed to move, that appeared to breathe, that looked like they were about to sit up and start talking. But what happened with Mrs. Elena Vasquez was different. Elena was brought in on a Thursday night, 74 years old, died of heart failure. Natural death, nothing traumatic. Her family wanted her prepared for a Saturday morning service. Standard procedure. I had all night Friday to complete the work. Elena was a beautiful woman. Even in death you could see the strength in her features, the character lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with laughter. Her family had brought clothes for the service, a deep blue dress with small pearl buttons, her wedding ring, a silver crucifix she'd worn every day for 50 years. I began the embalming process around midnight. Everything routine, arterial injection, cavity treatment, setting the features. Elena was an ideal subject. Good circulation pathways, no trauma to work around, healthy tissue that accepted the chemicals well. But as I worked, I started talking to her. I know that sounds strange, but it's not uncommon in this profession. When you're spending hours alone with someone, even someone who's passed, conversation helps focus the mind, keeps you company during the long night hours. You have a beautiful family, Elena, I found myself saying as I adjusted her expression, gently massaging the facial muscles to ensure natural positioning. They love you very much. 3 generations came to make arrangements. Your granddaughter looks just like you. That's when it happened. As my fingers worked along her jawline, I felt it. The slightest movement, not rigor mortis. I'd already worked through that. This was different, responsive, like she was trying to turn her head toward my voice. I pulled my hands back and stared at her face. Everything appeared normal, eyes closed, expression peaceful. But I could have sworn... "Elena?" I whispered, feeling foolish even as the word left my lips. Nothing, just the hum of the ventilation system and the quiet bubbling of the pump circulating embalming fluid. I convinced myself I'd imagined it and continued working. But as the night progressed, the sensations became stronger. Each time I touched her face, her hands, anywhere skin was still exposed, I felt warmth. Not the artificial warmth of heated embalming fluid, but body heat, human warmth. And the responsiveness grew more pronounced. When I lifted her hand to position her arms, her fingers seemed to curl slightly around mine. When I adjusted the position of her head, she appeared to nestle into my touch like someone finding comfort in sleep. By 4 a.m, I was rattled. This wasn't my imagination anymore. Elena Vasquez was responding to my touch as if she were alive. I stepped back from the table and really looked at her. Skin tone was good, natural color returning as the embalming fluid did its work. No signs of decomposition, no indication that anything was wrong with the process. But her chest, I could have sworn her chest was rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. I leaned closer, holding my breath, watching for any movement. and that's when she opened her eyes. Not suddenly, not like in the movies. Slowly, naturally, like someone waking from a peaceful nap. Her eyes found mine immediately, and she smiled.
"Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You have such gentle hands." I stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments. The clatter echoed through the preparation room, but Elena never flinched. She just continued to look at me with those warm, grateful eyes. "I know this is frightening for you," she continued, sitting up on the table with movements that were fluid, natural. "But please don't be afraid. You've given me something precious. You're dead," I managed to stammer. "You've been dead for 18 hours. I've embalmed you. This isn't possible." Elena looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers experimentally. "Dead, yes, but not gone. Not yet. You see, David, may I call you David? You have a gift, a touch that calls to those of us caught between worlds." She swung her legs over the side of the table and stood, moving with the grace of someone 30 years younger. The IV line for the embalming fluid had pulled free, but there was no bleeding, no sign of trauma. "Your grandfather told me about you," Elena said, walking to the window that looked out over the parking lot. "He's very proud, you know. Says you inherited the family gift." My grandfather? The room felt like it was spinning. He's been dead for 20 years. Death isn't the end of conversation, David. Just a change in volume. Elena turned back to me, and I saw something impossible. Her skin was glowing softly, as if lit from within. "He's been watching over your work. He sent me to tell you." I must have looked as confused as I felt, because Elena's expression grew gentle, patient. "Not everyone who dies is ready to go," she explained. "Some of us need help finding our way. Your touch, your skill, it gives us form again, substance, a way to say the things we couldn't say when we were alive." "What things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Elena moved to the telephone on my desk and dialed a number from memory. I heard ringing, then a young woman's voice, groggy with sleep. "Hello?" "Mija," Elena said, and I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Abuela? Abuela, is that you?" "Sí, mi amor." "I need you to listen carefully. In my bedroom, behind the picture of your abuelo, there's a loose brick in the wall. Behind it, you'll find a box. Inside are letters, love letters from before I married your grandfather." I could hear crying now, soft sobs through the phone speaker. "Abuela, I don't understand. How are you?" "Those letters are from your real grandfather, Mija. The man your mother thinks died in the war. He didn't die. I lied because I was already pregnant with your mother when I met the man you called abuelo. I was scared, alone. I made a choice to give my child a father." The silence on the other end stretched for long seconds. "Your real grandfather is still alive, Christina. He lives in Tucson now. His name is Miguel Santos, and he's been looking for us for 50 years. The letters will explain everything. And Christina, forgive me. I should have told the truth long ago." Elena hung up the phone and turned back to me. As she did, I could see her form beginning to fade slightly, becoming translucent. "Thank you, David, for giving me the chance to make things right." "Wait," I called out as she continued to fade. "What about the others? How many have you helped?" Elena smiled one last time. "Count your cases, David. Count the ones where families came back to thank you for making their loved ones look peaceful. Really count them."
Then ask yourself how many of those bodies you found exactly as you left them the next morning. She was gone. Just like that. The embalming table was empty, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. No footprints on the floor, no warmth lingering in the air. Just the smell of formaldehyde and the soft hum of equipment. I stood there for a long time trying to process what had happened. Then I did what Elena suggested. I went through my files, checking every case from the past year where families had specifically mentioned how natural their loved ones looked. 47 cases, 47 times when grieving relatives had taken my hands and thanked me for giving them peace. And in every single one of those files, I found notes from the day shift staff. Notes about bodies that had been repositioned overnight, clothes that had been adjusted, hands that had been moved to different positions, changes that I hadn't made. I quit the next week, told them I was moving out of state, pursuing other opportunities. But the truth is, I couldn't handle the responsibility. If Elena was right, if my touch really was calling the dead back for one last conversation, then I was playing with forces I didn't understand. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the families who never got those final words, the secrets that died with their loved ones, the forgiveness that was never asked for or given. I wonder if I made the right choice in walking away. David, if you're listening, and I have a feeling you are, I want you to consider something. You called it a gift, and maybe that's exactly what it was. Not a curse, not something to fear, but a genuine gift. How many families received closure because of your touch? How many secrets were finally shared? How many wrongs were made right? The dead don't return lightly, David. If they came back for you, it was because they had something important to say. I've been thinking about Elena's words, about counting the cases where something unexplained happened. It makes me wonder about all the funeral directors, embalmers, and morticians out there. How many of you have stories you've never shared? How many of you have felt that strange warmth, seen that impossible movement, heard words from lips that should never speak again? The storm's getting worse, folks, but we're staying put. These are the kinds of nights when the veil gets thin, when the impossible starts to feel possible. When the dead have stories to tell, and the living finally learn to listen. We've got more calls coming in, more emails arriving by the minute. I'm beginning to think that tonight's theme has struck a nerve, opened doors that some people had worked very hard to keep closed. But that's what we do here at WNMR. We open doors, shine lights into dark corners, and remind ourselves that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than our daylight minds want to admit. Stay with us, night owls. The dead, it seems, are eager to share their secrets, and we've only just begun to listen. You know, folks, there's something about nights like this that makes the boundary between worlds feel paper thin. The rain, the wind, the darkness pressing in from all sides. It's like nature herself is setting the stage for the impossible. I've been sitting here between segments, reading through more of the messages you've been sending. The response to tonight's show has been overwhelming. Phone calls, emails, even a few handwritten letters that were apparently faxed in from 24-hour copy shops. It seems like half the funeral industry has been listening tonight, and they all have stories to tell. But there's one message that's been sitting on my desk for 3 hours now. I keep picking it up, then setting it down again. Not because the story isn't compelling, quite the opposite, actually. It's because the person who sent it specifically asked me not to read it on the air until after midnight. Well, it's almost midnight now, and I think it's time. This letter came from a woman named Janet Morrison. She worked at Serenity Crematorium in Portland, Oregon. For 12 years, Janet was the night operator, the person responsible for ensuring that the final wishes of the deceased were carried out with dignity and respect. Janet's letter is handwritten, which is rare these days. The script is careful, precise, but I can see places where her hand trembled, where she had to stop and start again. She begins, "Mr. Cronkite, I've been listening to your show for years, but I never thought I'd have a reason to write. I always believed that what happened in the crematorium stayed in the crematorium, that some experiences were too personal, too sacred to share. But after hearing your other listeners tonight, I realize I'm not alone, and maybe, just maybe, sharing my story will help someone else understand that death isn't always the end of our responsibilities to those we've lost." Janet Morrison started working at Serenity Crematorium in 2013, just after her divorce. She needed a job that would pay enough to support her teenage daughter and the funeral industry, while Somber offered stable employment and decent benefits. Serenity was a modern facility, built in 1995 to serve the growing demand for cremation services in the Pacific Northwest. Clean, efficient, respectful. The kind of place where families could trust that their loved ones would be treated with dignity in their final journey. Janet's shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She was responsible for operating the cremation chambers, processing the remains, and preparing them for return to families. It was solitary work, but that suited her. After years of a chaotic marriage, she found peace in the quiet routines of her job. The crematorium had 3 chambers, each capable of handling one body at a time. The process took approximately 2 hours per cremation, depending on the size of the deceased and the type of container used. Janet would arrive each night to find the day shift's paperwork and the bodies that had been scheduled for cremation. For the first year, everything was routine, professional. Janet prided herself on her attention to detail, her respect for the deceased, and her ability to provide families with closure. She followed every protocol, double-checked every identification, and treated each person in her care as if they were her own family member. But in the winter of 2009, things began to change. It started with Mrs. Dorothy Chen, Janet wrote. She was an elderly woman who had died peacefully in her sleep. Her family had chosen cremation, and she was scheduled for processing on a Tuesday night in February. I began the cremation process at approximately 11:30 p.m. Standard procedure. I verified the identification paperwork, confirmed the body against the description, and started chamber number 2. Everything was normal. The cremation process isn't silent. There are sounds, the roar of the flames, the mechanical noise of the equipment, occasionally structural sounds as the container burns away. After a year on the job, I'd learned to distinguish between normal operational sounds and potential problems. But about 40 minutes into Mrs. Chen's cremation, I heard something new, a sound like singing. Faint, barely audible over the chamber noise, but definitely there. A woman's voice singing what sounded like a lullaby. I thought maybe it was interference from a radio somewhere in the building. Old buildings pick up strange signals sometimes. I checked every radio and communication device in the facility. All were turned off. The singing continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped. The cremation completed normally, and I processed Mrs. Chen's remains according to standard procedure. Her ashes were returned to her family the following day. I didn't think much about it until 2 weeks later, when Mrs. Chen's daughter called the crematorium. She wanted to thank us, she said, to thank the person who had been singing to her mother during the cremation. Singing? I asked, confused. I'm sorry, Mrs. Liu, but no one was singing. The cremation was performed according to standard procedures. But we heard it, Mrs. Liu insisted. My family was here in the parking lot, saying our final prayers. We heard someone singing inside the building. A lullaby. The same one my mother used to sing to me when I was small. I didn't know what to tell her. I was the only person in the building that night, and I certainly hadn't been singing. But Mrs. Liu was adamant. Her entire family had heard it. After that phone call, I started paying closer attention, and I realized that Mrs. Chen wasn't an isolated incident. 3 nights later, I was cremating an elderly man named Robert Harrison. About halfway through the process, I heard music again. Not singing this time, but the sound of someone playing piano. Classical music, beautifully performed. It seemed to be coming from inside chamber number 1. I called Mr. Harrison's son the next day just to see if the music had any significance. It did. Robert Harrison had been a piano teacher for 40 years. He'd played classical music every evening until arthritis made it impossible. The piece I'd heard, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, had been his favorite. That's when I started keeping notes. Detailed records of every cremation, every unusual sound, every family reaction. Over the next 6 months, a pattern emerged. It only happened with certain people. Older individuals mostly, people who had lived full lives, who had passions, hobbies, things they loved deeply. And the sounds I heard during their cremations were always connected to those passions. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, who had been a seamstress for 50 years. I heard the steady rhythm of a sewing machine throughout her cremation. Mr. James Woodward, a carpenter. The sound of hammering and sawing echoed from the chamber. Mrs. Sarah Kim, who had taught kindergarten for 30 years. Children's laughter and the sound of someone reading aloud. At first I thought I was losing my mind. The stress of the job, working alone at night, the psychological weight of dealing with death every day, it had to be taking a toll. But then families started calling, every single one. Always the next day, always with stories about hearing something during their loved one's cremation, something that reminded them of the person they'd lost. I realized I wasn't imagining the sounds. I was hearing the echoes of lives lived fully, passions that refused to die, even when the body did. Most of the time it was beautiful, comforting even. Like the deceased were letting their families know that the things they loved most were still with them. But not always. 3 months ago, I was assigned to cremate a man named William Devereaux. 58 years old, died of a heart attack. He'd been a successful businessman, owned several restaurants in the Portland area. On paper, everything looked normal. But from the moment I started his cremation, I knew something was wrong. Instead of music or laughter or the sounds of a life well lived, I heard screaming, not from the chamber. I knew those sounds, knew what happened when things went wrong mechanically. This was different. Human screaming full of anguish and terror. I almost stopped the cremation, almost called my supervisor, but the paperwork was in order. The family had made their wishes clear. I had no legitimate reason to interrupt the process. The screaming continued for nearly an hour. Sometimes it was William's voice. I'd heard him speak when his body was brought in, and I recognized the tone. But sometimes it was other voices, multiple voices, all crying out in what sounded like agony. When the cremation was complete, I processed his remains as quickly as possible. I wanted him out of the building, wanted this night to be over. The next morning, William's widow called, not to thank us, but to ask a question that made my blood run cold. "The person who cremated my husband," she said. "Did they hear anything unusual?" I told her no, that everything had proceeded normally. I couldn't bring myself to share what I'd actually experienced. "It's just that—" She paused, and I could hear her struggling with her words. "William wasn't a good man, Mr. Morrison. I know it's wrong to speak ill of the dead, but I can't pretend anymore. He hurt people, destroyed lives, ruined businesses and families for profit." She went on to tell me about the restaurant workers he'd cheated out of wages, the small business owners he'd driven to bankruptcy, the health code violations he'd covered up that had resulted in food poisoning outbreaks. One outbreak had put a child in the hospital for 3 weeks. "I stayed with him because I was afraid," she admitted. "But I always wondered what would happen when he died. If there would be consequences." After that conversation, I started researching the people I cremated. Not invasive research, just public records, obituaries, news articles. What I found changed everything. The people whose cremations were accompanied by beautiful sounds, music, laughter, singing, they had been genuinely good people. Community volunteers, loving parents, individuals who had dedicated their lives to helping others. But there had been others, people like William Devereaux. And during their cremations, I had heard very different sounds: crying, screaming, sometimes what sounded like multiple voices, all pleading or expressing pain. I began to understand that I wasn't just hearing echoes of their lives. I was hearing the weight of their choices, the consequences of their actions, the beauty and the ugliness, the love and the harm, all of it compressed into those final moments. Last month, I cremated a woman named Margaret Foster. She had been a nurse for 40 years, worked in pediatric oncology. During her cremation, I heard the most beautiful sound I've ever experienced, a choir of children's voices singing a hymn. It was so lovely that I found myself crying. But the very next night, I was assigned to cremate a man named Charles Brennan, a former police officer who had died in a car accident. The sounds that came from his chamber, I can't even describe them properly. Voices pleading, begging for mercy. The sound of violence, corruption, abuse of power. I researched him afterward, found news articles dating back 15 years, excessive force complaints, evidence tampering, a cover-up involving the assault of a suspect who later died in custody. That was my last night at Serenity Crematorium. I submitted my resignation the next morning. But I can't stop thinking about what I experienced there, about the responsibility that comes with being the last person to handle someone's remains. We think cremation is just a disposal of the body, a practical matter. But what if it's more than that? What if it's a final accounting, a moment when the sum total of a person's life is weighed and measured? I don't know if what I heard was real or imagined. I don't know if those sounds came from the deceased themselves or from something else entirely. But I know that every family who called afterward had heard something too. Something that confirmed what they already knew about the person they'd lost. Mr. Cronkite, I'm sharing this because I think people need to understand that death isn't just an end, it's a judgment. And those of us who work in this industry, we're not just handling bodies, we're handling souls. I've found new work now, during the day, in an office, far from the world of death and cremation. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those sounds, the beautiful and the terrible, the joyful and the damned. And I wonder about all the people I help transition from this world to whatever comes next. I wonder if I was witness to something sacred, something that most people never get to see. The final moment when our choices, our actions, our love, and our cruelty all come home to roost. Janet, I want you to know that your letter has moved me more than I can express. The idea that our final moments might be a reflection of our lives, our choices, our impact on others. It's both terrifying and oddly comforting. If you're listening tonight, I hope you found peace in your new life. But I also hope you understand the gift you were given. To witness those final accountings, to hear the true sound of a life lived, that's not something that happens by accident. Maybe you were meant to be there, Janet. Maybe those families needed someone who would listen, who would understand the significance of what they were hearing. Maybe the dead needed a witness to their final song, whether it was beautiful or heartbreaking. WNMR, this is Edward. Edward, this is Janet Morrison. Janet? My God, I just finished reading your letter on the air. How are you? I'm in my car, Edward. Outside Serenity Crematorium. I drove here after hearing your show tonight. I thought I was done with this place, but something drew me back. What do you see, Janet? The building's dark, but chamber number 2 is running. I can see the glow through the windows. But Edward, I can hear singing. The same beautiful singing I used to hear during the good cremations. It's coming from inside the building. Are you going to go in? I think I have to. I think someone needs a witness tonight. Someone whose life deserves to be heard and remembered properly. Edward, keep telling these stories. Keep reminding people that death isn't the end of responsibility, that our choices echo long after we're gone. Janet Morrison, ladies and gentlemen, a woman who understands that some jobs are more than just work. They're callings. We're going to take a short break, folks. When we come back, we have more stories from the night shift. More witnesses to the mysterious world that exists in the spaces between life and death. Stay with us. The night is far from over, and the dead, it seems, still have much to say. Well, night owls, that was unexpected. Janet Morrison calling in live from outside the crematorium where she used to work. I have to admit, that gave me chills. There's something about these real-time connections that makes everything feel more immediate, more real. I've been going through the messages that have come in tonight, and I'm starting to see patterns, not just in the stories themselves, but in the people telling them. There's a weight to this work, a psychological toll that comes with being surrounded by death every day. And sometimes that weight breaks something open, makes people receptive to experiences that others might dismiss as impossible. The next story comes from an email I received just after midnight. The timestamp shows it was sent at 12:07 a.m., which means the sender was probably listening to Janet's segment when they decided to share their own experience. The email comes from Dr. Lisa Chen, and yes, before you ask, she confirmed that she's not related to the Mrs. Dorothy Chen from Janet's story. Dr. Chen works as a forensic pathologist at the Riverside County Morgue in California. She's been in the field for 8 years, and up until 6 months ago, she was a firm believer in scientific materialism. Death was biological cessation, nothing more. But something happened last fall that changed her perspective entirely. Dear Edward, I've been listening to your show tonight, and I feel compelled to share something that I've never told anyone. Not my colleagues, not my family, not even my therapist. But hearing these other stories from funeral workers, I realize I'm not alone in what I experienced. My name is Dr. Lisa Chen, and I'm a forensic pathologist. I perform autopsies, determine causes of death, testify in court cases, It's scientific work, methodical and evidence-based. I deal in facts, not feelings. Or at least I used to. The Riverside County Morgue is a busy place. We handle deaths from 3 counties, everything from natural deaths to homicides to unexplained cases. On average, I perform 4 to 6 autopsies per day, working mostly during regular business hours. But sometimes when we have a backlog or an urgent case, I work nights. October 15th was one of those nights. I was called in around 9 p.m. to perform an emergency autopsy on a John Doe who had been found in the Angeles National Forest. Hikers had discovered the body 3 days earlier, and the condition of the remains suggested he'd been dead for at least 2 weeks. The detective on the case needed preliminary findings for a meeting with the DA the next morning. John Doe appeared to be in his 60s, well-nourished, no obvious signs of trauma. My initial assessment suggested natural causes, possibly a heart attack or stroke. He'd been wearing expensive hiking gear and had no identification, but he didn't look like someone who'd died from exposure or foul play. I began the autopsy around 10:30 p.m. The morgue was empty except for me and the security guard who was stationed upstairs in the lobby. Standard procedure for night work, autopsy suite sealed, all protocols followed, detailed documentation of every step. The external examination revealed nothing unusual. No defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of violence. I photographed everything, took measurements, collected samples for toxicology. Then I began the internal examination. That's when things got strange. As I made the Y incision, I heard something that made me pause. A sound like whispering, very faint, barely audible over the ventilation system. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Nothing. Just the usual morgue sounds, air circulation, refrigeration units, the distant hum of fluorescent lights. I continued with the autopsy. But as I worked, the whispering returned. Not constant, but periodic, like someone having a conversation just out of earshot. The strangest part was that it seemed to be coming from John Doe himself. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But I've performed over 1,000 autopsies in my career. I know the difference between normal post-mortem sounds and something else entirely. The whispering grew more distinct as I continued working. I began to make out words. Not English, but something familiar. It took me a few minutes to realize it was Spanish. Fragments of conversation, incomplete sentences, but definitely Spanish. ¿Dónde está mi familia? No puedo encontrar mi camino a casa. Por favor, ayúdame. Where is my family? I can't find my way home. Please help me. I stopped the autopsy and stepped back from the table. The whispering continued for about 30 seconds, then faded away. I stood there, staring at John Doe's body, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Carbon monoxide exposure can cause auditory hallucinations. So can fatigue, stress, certain medications. I'd been working long hours lately, and the morgue environment can be psychologically taxing. There had to be a logical explanation. I resumed the autopsy, focusing on the internal organs. Heart showed signs of moderate atherosclerosis, but nothing immediately fatal. Lungs were clear, liver appeared normal. I was beginning to think this would be a case where the cause of death remained undetermined. Then I examined his stomach contents. Mixed in with partially digested food, I found something unexpected. Small pieces of paper, not just any paper, what looked like torn photographs. I extracted the fragments carefully and laid them out on a clean surface. Even damaged by stomach acid, I could make out faces. A family photo. A man who looked like our John Doe but younger. a woman, 3 children. On the back of one fragment I could see partial writing, Familia Garcia, 1987. Garcia. Our John Doe had a name. As soon as I read those words, the whispering returned. But this time, it was different, clearer, more urgent. Miguel Garcia, ese es mi nombre. Miguel Garcia de Guadalajara. My name is Miguel Garcia. Miguel Garcia from Guadalajara. I nearly dropped the photograph fragment. The voice was coming from the body on the table, but it was speaking as if the person were alive, aware, trying to communicate. Vine aquí para encontrar a mi hijo, Carlos Garcia. Trabaja en una fábrica en Los Angeles. I came here to find my son, Carlos Garcia. He works in a factory in Los Angeles. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but I understood enough. This man, Miguel Garcia, had come to the United States looking for his son. He died alone in the mountains, and somehow he was still trying to complete his mission. But the truly disturbing part was what happened next. Doctora, ¿puede ayudarme? ¿Puede encontrar a mi familia? Doctor, can you help me? Can you find my family? He was talking to me, directly to me. I backed away from the table, my hands shaking. This wasn't possible. Dead bodies don't speak. They don't have conversations. They don't ask for help. But Miguel Garcia's voice continued, and now there was desperation in it. No quiero estar solo. He estado buscando por tanto tiempo. I don't want to be alone. I've been searching for so long. I left the autopsy suite, walked straight to the break room and sat down, trying to process what was happening. After 10 minutes, I returned to complete the examination. The whispering had stopped, and Miguel Garcia was just a body on a table again. But I couldn't forget what I'd heard. The next morning, I filed my preliminary report. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, likely brought on by exhaustion and dehydration. But I also did something I'd never done before. I researched the name Miguel Garcia. It took some time, but I found him. Miguel Garcia, 67 years old, reported missing by his family in Guadalajara 6 weeks earlier. He'd left Mexico with the intention of finding his son, Carlos, who had been working illegally in Los Angeles for 3 years without contact. I found Carlos Garcia too. He was working at a textile factory in East LA, sending money home to his family but afraid to call because of his immigration status. He had no idea his father had come looking for him. That afternoon, I made a decision that violated every protocol I'd ever been taught. I called Carlos Garcia. "Mr. Garcia?" I said when he answered. "This is Dr. Lisa Chen from the Riverside County Morgue. I believe we have your father here." The silence on the other end was deafening. "My father? But he's in Mexico. I'm sorry, Mr. Garcia. He was found in the Angeles National Forest 2 weeks ago. But before you come in for identification, I need to tell you something. Your father, he was carrying photographs of your family, and he had your name written on a piece of paper in his pocket." I could hear Carlos beginning to cry. "He came here for me," he whispered. "He came to find me, and he died alone." "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "He wasn't alone. He was still looking for you, even after he was still trying to get home." Carlos came in the next day with his uncle, who had legal status. The identification was positive. Miguel Garcia had indeed traveled from Guadalajara to find his son. He died of exhaustion in the mountains, probably within 20 miles of where Carlos was living.
But here's what I couldn't put in my official report. During the identification, when Carlos first saw his father's body, he broke down completely. Started speaking to Miguel in rapid Spanish, apologizing for not calling, for not writing, for making his father worry. And for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard Miguel's voice again. Faint, but unmistakable. Te perdono, mijo. Siempre te he amado. I forgive you, my son. I have always loved you. Carlos heard it too. I could see it in his face, the way he suddenly stopped crying and looked around the room. He asked me if I'd heard anything, and I told him no. I didn't want him to think he was losing his mind, but I heard it. And I think Miguel Garcia finally found what he was looking for. The family arranged for Miguel's body to be transported back to Mexico for burial. Carlos quit his job at the factory and went home with his father's remains. Last I heard, he was working legally now, with proper documentation that allowed him to support his family while staying in contact. I've thought about that night countless times. About Miguel's voice, about the photographs he'd swallowed, about the determination that kept him searching even after death. I've come to believe that some connections are stronger than mortality. That love, particularly parental love, can transcend physical boundaries. I haven't heard voices during autopsies since then, but I've changed how I approach my work. Every body that comes through our doors was someone's family member, someone's child, parent, sibling, friend. They all have stories, and some of those stories aren't finished when the heart stops beating. I document everything more carefully now. I research the people I examine when possible. And sometimes, when families come in for identification, I tell them things that weren't in the official report, small details that might bring comfort. Evidence that their loved one was thinking of them at the end, because I learned something from Miguel Garcia. Sometimes being dead doesn't mean you've stopped caring about the people you left behind. Sometimes it just means you need a different kind of help to reach them. Edward, I don't know if you believe in ghosts or spirits or any kind of afterlife, but I believe in love that survives death. I believe in connections that transcend the physical world, and I believe that sometimes those of us who work with the dead are meant to be messengers for the messages that couldn't be delivered in life. Thank you for giving me a place to share this story. I've never told anyone before, but hearing about Marcus and David and Janet, I realized that we're all part of something larger. We're witnesses to the thin places where death meets love, where the impossible becomes necessary. Dr. Lisa Chen, Riverside County Morgue. Dr. Chen, if you're listening, I want you to know that your story touched something deep in me. The idea that love transcends death, that our most profound connections can survive even the ultimate separation. It's both heartbreaking and hopeful. Miguel Garcia traveled hundreds of miles and died alone in the mountains, but in the end, he found what he was looking for. Not just his son, but the chance to deliver a message that Carlos needed to hear. Forgiveness, love. The assurance that family bonds don't break, even when everything else does. And you, Dr. Chen, you served as the bridge between worlds. You listened when Miguel needed someone to hear him, and you made sure his message reached the person who needed it most. You know, folks, we're approaching the witching hour here, and I'm starting to understand something about the people who've shared their stories tonight. They're not just funeral workers or medical professionals. They're translators. They stand at the boundary between life and death, and they help the rest of us understand what that boundary really means. The dead, it seems, don't always go quietly. Sometimes they have unfinished business.
Sometimes they have love left to give, forgiveness to offer, messages that couldn't be delivered while they were alive. And sometimes, on nights like this, when the storm rages and the veil grows thin, those messages find their way through. We have more stories coming. Night owls. More witnesses to the impossible, more messengers from the spaces between worlds. The night is dark, the storm is strong, and the dead have so much more to say. Stay with us. We're just getting to the heart of the matter. Night owls, we're deep into the witching hour now, and I have to say tonight feels different from any show I've done before. The energy, the immediacy of these stories, the fact that so many of you are reaching out in real time, it's like the whole death industry has been waiting for permission to speak about the things they've experienced but never dared to share. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. My email inbox is overflowing, and just 5 minutes ago, someone slid a handwritten note under the front door of the station. In this storm, in the middle of the night, someone drove out here just to share their story. The note is from someone who signs himself only as RW. Says he's been listening since the beginning of tonight's show and finally worked up the courage to drive over here. He writes, "Mr. Cronkite, I've been a funeral director for 23 years. I thought I'd seen everything death had to offer. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you happened 2 years ago, and it changed everything I thought I knew about my profession. But before I share RW's story, I want to read you something that came in through email about 10 minutes ago. This one's from Thomas Blackwood. And yes, I know I said we'd avoid that name, but sometimes reality has a sense of irony. Thomas has been the managing director of Blackwood and Associates Funeral Home in Savannah, Georgia for 15 years. It's a family business, started by his grandfather in 1952. Thomas writes, "Edward, I've been putting off writing this email all night. Every time I start typing, I question whether I should share what happened. But listening to these other stories, I realized that what I experienced wasn't unique. It was just my turn to witness something that happens more often than any of us want to admit. My name is Thomas Morrison, and I run a funeral home that's been in my family for 3 generations. We serve a diverse community in Savannah, everyone from old Southern families who've been here for centuries to new residents who chose our city for its beauty and history. 2 years ago, we were contracted to handle the funeral arrangements for a woman named Evelyn Marsh. She was 92 years old, had lived her entire life in Savannah, and was well known in the community as a volunteer and philanthropist. Her death wasn't unexpected. She'd been in hospice care for several weeks, but her family wanted an elaborate celebration of life, befitting someone who had given so much to the city. The service was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at St. John's Episcopal Church, followed by burial at Bonaventure Cemetery. Mrs. Marsh's family had spared no expense. Flowers from 3 different florists, a gospel choir, a reception for over 200 people. Everything had to be perfect. I personally oversaw every detail of Mrs. Marsh's preparation and the funeral arrangements. She was a lovely woman, even in death, dignified, peaceful, with the kind of face that spoke of a life well lived. The embalming process went smoothly, and she looked beautiful in the pale blue dress her granddaughter had chosen. The viewing was scheduled for Wednesday evening, from 6 to 9 p.m. Standard 3-hour visitation, enough time for friends and family to pay their respects without being overwhelming for the elderly attendees. Everything went perfectly for the first 2 hours. Steady stream of visitors, beautiful flowers, heartfelt condolences. Mrs. Marsh looked natural and peaceful in her casket, and several people commented on how well she'd been prepared. It was exactly the kind of service that makes this job worthwhile. But around 8 o'clock, something changed. I was standing near the back of the viewing room, ensuring that everything was running smoothly, when I noticed that Mrs. Marsh's granddaughter, Jennifer, was having an intense conversation with an elderly woman I didn't recognize. Jennifer looked upset, and the conversation was becoming heated. I approached them to see if I could help resolve whatever was troubling them. "Excuse me," I said quietly, not wanting to disturb the other mourners. "Is everything all right?" Jennifer looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, this woman says she's my grandmother's sister, but that's impossible. Grandma was an only child." The elderly woman, who appeared to be in her 80s, smiled at me sadly. "I'm Rose Marsh," she said in a voice that was remarkably similar to Mrs. Marsh's. "Evelyn's twin sister. I know this is confusing, but I had to come say goodbye." Jennifer shook her head. "Mr. Morrison, please tell her." "My grandmother never had a sister. She was an only child. Her parents died when she was young, and she was raised by her aunt. There's no Rose Marsh." I found myself in an uncomfortable position. Family disputes during funerals aren't uncommon, but this was unusual. The woman claiming to be Rose certainly looked like she could be related to Mrs. Marsh. Same bone structure, same eyes, even similar mannerisms. "Ma'am," I said to Rose, "could you tell me a bit more about your relationship with Mrs. Marsh? When did you last see her?" Rose's eyes filled with tears. "We were separated when we were 7 years old. After our parents died, different relatives took each of us. I was sent to live with cousins in Charleston, and Evelyn stayed here in Savannah with our aunt. We lost touch completely." "But why didn't you reconnect?" Jennifer asked. "Why didn't Grandma ever mention you?" "Because I died first," Rose said simply. The words hung in the air between us. Jennifer stared at Rose in shock, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "I died 15 years ago," Rose continued. "Cancer. I was buried in Charleston without ever finding Evelyn again. But I couldn't rest knowing that my sister was alone. When I felt her spirit calling, I knew she was ready to join me." Jennifer grabbed my arm. "Mr. Morrison, this woman is obviously confused. She's probably suffering from dementia or—" But as she spoke, I was looking at Rose more carefully, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. Rose Marsh wasn't casting a shadow. The lighting in the viewing room was bright and even, and every other person in the room cast clear shadows on the carpet. But the area around Rose's feet was empty. "Rose," I said carefully, "would you mind coming with me to my office? I'd like to look into your situation privately." Rose nodded and followed me out of the viewing room. But as we walked toward my office, I noticed something else. Her footsteps made no sound on the hardwood floors, and when we passed other mourners, they didn't seem to see her at all. In my office, I closed the door and turned to face Rose. She was sitting in the chair across from my desk, and she looked more solid, more real than she had in the viewing room. "You can see me clearly, can't you, Mr. Morrison?" she asked. "Most people can't, but you work with the dead every day. You understand things that others don't. Are you really dead, Rose?" She nodded. 15 years ago, buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston. Plot 47B if you want to check. "Why are you here?" "Because Evelyn is my twin sister, and we promised each other when we were children that we'd never be alone. Death separated us,
but it doesn't have to keep us apart forever. I spent the next 20 minutes talking with Rose. She told me stories about her childhood with Evelyn, details that I later verified with Jennifer, things that would have been impossible to know unless she had actually been Evelyn's twin sister. "What do you need from me?" I finally asked. "Permission to say goodbye," Rose said, "and help convincing Jennifer that some bonds survive death." I returned to the viewing room with Rose, but this time I was watching the other mourners carefully. Most people didn't acknowledge her presence at all. A few glanced in her direction with confused expressions, as if they sensed something but couldn't quite identify what it was. But when Rose approached Mrs. Marsh's casket, something remarkable happened. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Several people commented on the sudden chill, and then, as Rose placed her hand on her sister's forehead, Mrs. Marsh's face changed. The peaceful expression she'd worn all evening shifted to something that looked almost like relief, like recognition. "Sleep well, sister," Rose whispered. "I'll be waiting for you." And then she was gone. Not gradually, not dramatically, simply absent, as if she had never been there at all. But the change in Mrs. Marsh was visible. She looked different, happier, complete. Jennifer stared at the casket for a long moment, then looked at me. Did that really just happen? Before I could answer, an elderly man approached us, someone I recognized as a longtime friend of the family. "Jennifer," he said, "I just wanted to tell you how wonderful it is that Rose was able to make it tonight. I haven't seen her since the funeral 15 years ago." Jennifer's face went white. "What did you say?" "Rose, your grandmother's twin sister. I was surprised to see her here, given how frail she was the last time I saw her. But she and Evelyn were always inseparable. It's fitting that she came to say goodbye." After the other mourners left, I drove to the public library and researched Rose Marsh, found her obituary in the Charleston Post and Courier, dated exactly 15 years earlier. Died of ovarian cancer at age 77, survived by no immediate family, buried in Magnolia Cemetery. The next morning, I called the cemetery in Charleston. Plot 47B was indeed occupied by Rose Marsh and had been for 15 years. Mrs. Marsh's funeral proceeded beautifully the next day. The service was moving, the burial was peaceful, and the family found comfort in celebrating her long and generous life. But I couldn't stop thinking about Rose's visit. That evening, I received a phone call from Jennifer. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I've been going through Grandma's papers and I found something. A box of old letters hidden in her closet. They're from someone named Rose. Letters that span over 60 years. "What do they say?" "They're letters Rose wrote to Evelyn but never sent. Dozens of them. Birthday wishes, Christmas greetings, updates about her life in Charleston. She wrote to my grandmother every year on their birthday, telling her how much she missed her and hoped they'd be reunited someday." Jennifer paused, and I could hear her crying softly. The last letter is dated just 2 days before Rose died. She wrote, "Evelyn, I know you can't hear me from this world, but I want you to know I'll be waiting for you. Death won't separate us forever. When your time comes, look for me. I'll be there to walk with you to whatever comes next." I didn't know what to say to that. What could I say? "Mr. Morrison, do you think the dead can really come back? Do you think love is strong enough to survive death?" "I think," I said carefully, "that some connections are stronger than anything we understand. And I think your grandmother wasn't alone when she died.
I think she was surrounded by more love than any of us realized. Edward, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow, a lot of people struggling to let go of the ones they love. But that night with Rose and Evelyn taught me something important. Death isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's a reunion. Sometimes the people we think are gone are just waiting in a place we can't see, ready to welcome us home when our time comes. I handle every funeral differently now. I look at every body not just as someone who has died, but as someone who might be preparing for a reunion. And I listen more carefully when families tell me about strange experiences, unusual dreams, or feeling the presence of their loved ones. Because sometimes the most impossible things are the most true. Thomas Morrison, Morrison and Associates Funeral Home. Thomas, that's a beautiful story. The idea that death might be a reunion rather than a separation. It changes everything, doesn't it? It makes every funeral not just a goodbye, but a see you later. WNMR. This is Edward. Mr. Cronkite, my name is Jennifer Marsh. I'm calling from Savannah. Jennifer? From Thomas Morrison's story? Yes. I've been listening to your show tonight, and when I heard Mr. Morrison sharing what happened at my grandmother's funeral, I had to call. What can you tell us, Jennifer? What Mr. Morrison didn't mention in his email is what happened after we buried my grandmother. That night, I dreamed about her. But she wasn't alone. She was with a woman who looked exactly like her. They were young again, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and they were holding hands. In the dream, they both looked at me and smiled. My grandmother said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'm not alone anymore. I found my sister, and we're going home together." When I woke up, I felt peaceful. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Jennifer, do you believe Rose was really there that night? I know she was. And I know that death isn't the end of love. It's just a different kind of beginning. Mr. Cronkite, I hope your listeners understand what they're hearing tonight. These aren't just ghost stories, they're love stories. Stories about connections that are stronger than death itself. Jennifer Marsh, everyone. Calling from Savannah to confirm that some bonds truly are unbreakable. We're well past midnight now, folks, and the stories keep coming. Each one a testament to the idea that our understanding of death, of what happens when the heart stops beating, might be far more limited than we'd like to admit. The storm is directly overhead now, and I'm starting to feel like we're at the center of something much larger than a radio show. Like tonight, this collection of stories, these voices from the edge of life and death, is creating its own kind of weather. We have more stories to share, more witnesses to hear from. The night is far from over, and the boundary between worlds has never felt thinner. Stay close, night owls. We're about to venture even deeper into the places where love transcends death, where the impossible becomes inevitable, and where the dead refuse to remain silent. Night owls, I have to tell you something. In all my years doing this show, I've never felt anything quite like what's happening tonight. It's as if the stories themselves are creating some kind of resonance. Each tale we share seems to open another door, invite another voice from the shadows. This note just appeared on my desk. I didn't hear anyone come in,
didn't hear footsteps or the door opening. But here it is, written in handwriting I don't recognize, signed only with the initials M.R. The note says, "Edward, I've been driving all night, listening to your show. What you're doing tonight, it's important. You're giving voice to things that need to be heard. I'm pulling into your parking lot now. I have a story that needs telling, but I don't think I can write it down. May I come in?" "Well, M.R., whoever you are, the door's unlocked. Come on in from the storm." "Mr. Cronkite, thank you for letting me come in. I'm Michael Rodriguez. I've been listening to your show tonight and, well, I think it's time I told someone about what happened to me 3 months ago." "Michael, come on in. You look like you've seen a ghost." That's not far from the truth, actually. Please sit down. Tell us who you are, what you do." "I work for Eternal Rest Transport Services. We're the company that moves bodies between hospitals, morgues, funeral homes, wherever they need to go. I've been doing this job for 8 years. Drive a specially equipped van, handle all the paperwork, make sure families' loved ones are treated with dignity during what's often their final journey. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary. And most of the time it's peaceful. The dead don't complain about traffic, don't ask to stop for coffee, don't argue about the radio station. They're just passengers. But 3 months ago, I picked up a passenger who changed everything I thought I knew about this job. It was a Tuesday night in March, late pickup around 11 p.m. Hospital called and said they had a transport ready for Mercy Memorial Funeral Home across town. Standard run, maybe 20 minutes in normal traffic. The deceased was a young woman named Maria Santos, 24 years old, died in a car accident earlier that evening. Tragic case. She'd been driving home from her job at a local restaurant when a drunk driver ran a red light. Killed instantly, they said. Her family was devastated. I loaded Maria into the van following all normal procedures. Body bag secured, paperwork completed, route planned, everything by the book. The night was quiet, not much traffic, and I expected to have her delivered within half an hour. About 5 minutes into the drive, I heard something that made me check my mirrors. A sound like movement, coming from the back of the van. Now I know bodies can make noises, gases escaping, muscles relaxing, normal post-mortem changes. After 8 years, I'd heard it all. But this was different. It sounded deliberate, like someone shifting position. I pulled over and checked the back. Maria's body was exactly where I'd placed it. Body bag properly secured, nothing out of place. I convinced myself I'd imagined it and continued driving. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't just movement. It was a voice. "Please, help me." I nearly drove off the road. I pulled into a parking lot and sat there, engine running, trying to process what I'd heard. Dead bodies don't speak. It's impossible. But the voice had been clear, female, coming from directly behind me. I called my supervisor, Jim, and explained the situation. "Mike," he said, "you're tired. Long shift, emotional case. Take 5 minutes, get some air, then complete the delivery. These things happen." But as I was talking to Jim, I heard the voice again. "Please, I'm not dead. Please help me." This time I couldn't dismiss it. I ended the call with Jim and opened the back of the van. Sarah's body was still secured, but the body bag looked different, less flat, as if someone were breathing inside it. I know this sounds insane, but I unzipped the bag. Sarah's eyes were open. Not the glazed, vacant stare of death, but alert, aware, terrified. She looked directly at me and whispered, "Thank you for stopping." I stumbled backward, nearly falling out of the van. This was impossible. The hospital had pronounced her dead. The death certificate was signed. Her body had been in the morgue for 6 hours. "Sarah?" I managed to say. "Sarah, can you hear me?" "Yes," she said, her voice weak but clear. "I can hear everything. I've been trying to tell people, but no one listens. They think I'm dead, but I'm not. I'm trapped." I immediately called 911, told them I had a transport who was showing signs of life, that we needed an ambulance immediately. The dispatcher was confused, but sent paramedics to our location. While we waited, Maria talked to me, told me about the accident, about waking up in the hospital morgue, about trying to scream but being unable to move. She'd been conscious the entire time, trapped in her own body. "It's like being buried alive," she said. "I can see, I can hear, I can think, but I can't move, can't speak loudly enough for anyone to notice." When they pronounced me dead, I was screaming inside my head, but no one could hear me. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. They were skeptical at first. After all, I was claiming that a dead body was talking to me. But when they checked Maria's vitals, they found a weak but steady pulse. Her body temperature was low but not consistent with death. She was alive. They rushed her to the hospital, and I followed in my van. The emergency room staff was in shock. According to their records, Maria Santos had been pronounced dead 6 hours earlier. But here she was, conscious and speaking. The doctor who examined her explained that Sarah had been in an extremely deep coma, so deep that her vital signs were nearly undetectable. In the chaos following the accident, with multiple trauma victims arriving simultaneously, she'd been misdiagnosed as deceased. "This is extraordinarily rare," the doctor told me, "but it does happen. Deep coma can sometimes mimic death so closely that even experienced medical professionals can be fooled." Maria made a full recovery. She had some memory loss from the head trauma, but physically she was fine. Her family was overjoyed, calling it a miracle. The hospital launched an investigation into how the misdiagnosis had occurred. But here's the part that still haunts me. 3 days after Maria was released from the hospital, she called me. "Michael," she said, "I need to tell you something I haven't told the doctors or my family." "What is it, Maria?" When everyone thought I was dead, I wasn't alone. There were other people there, in the morgue, in the funeral home storage, everywhere they take bodies, other people who aren't really dead but can't make anyone understand." The hair on my arms stood up. "What do you mean?" "I could see them, Michael. Dozens of them, people lying in drawers in body bags, trying to call out, trying to move, but unable to make anyone notice. They've been there for days, weeks, some of them, waiting for someone to realize they're not really gone." "Maria, that's not possible." "I know how it sounds, but I was there. I saw them. And Michael, some of them have been waiting so long that they're starting to fade, starting to actually die from being trapped in their own bodies." She gave me names, specific names and locations. I didn't want to believe her, but something in her voice, her certainty, made me investigate. I contacted funeral homes, morgues, checked obituaries against the names she'd given me. What I found disturbed me more than I can express. 7 of the names Maria mentioned corresponded to people who had been diagnosed as brain dead or who had died of unknown causes in the past month.
7 people whose deaths might not have been as final as everyone believed. I tried to investigate further, but I hit walls everywhere. Medical facilities, funeral homes, government agencies. No one wanted to discuss the possibility that people might be incorrectly diagnosed as dead. Too much liability, too many lawsuits, too much potential for panic. But I couldn't let it go. I started paying closer attention during my transports, really listening, really watching for signs that might indicate someone wasn't as dead as they appeared. And you know what I found? Maria was right. Over the past 3 months, I've identified 6 people who showed signs of life during transport. 6 people who were supposed to be dead, but who responded to stimuli, who moved, who even spoke. Each time, I stopped the transport and called for medical assistance. Each time, the person was found to be alive. 6 people who would have been buried or cremated if I hadn't been listening. But here's what really terrifies me. I've been doing this job for 8 years. How many people did I transport before Sarah opened my eyes? How many people did I deliver to funeral homes or crematoriums who were still alive but unable to communicate? How many people have we buried alive because we were too afraid to consider the possibility that our understanding of death might be incomplete? Michael, what you're describing, it's every person's worst nightmare. Being trapped, aware, but unable to communicate, and the implications for the funeral industry, for families. That's why I haven't told this story before tonight. The legal implications alone would shut down half the funeral homes in the country. But listening to your show, hearing these other stories, I realize that keeping quiet isn't protecting anyone. It's just ensuring that more people suffer in silence. Folks go, I don't know what to say about Michael's story. The medical phenomenon he's describing, mistaking deep coma for death, is documented in medical literature. It's rare, but it happens. The question is, how often does it happen without anyone realizing? WNMR, this is Edward. Mr. Cronkite, this is Maria Santos. I'm calling from Portland. Maria? The Maria from Michael's story? Yes, I've been listening tonight, and when I heard Michael telling what happened, I had to call. Maria, it's Michael. How are you doing? I'm alive, Michael, thanks to you, but I need to tell your listeners something. What Michael shared tonight, it's just the beginning. Those people I saw when I was trapped, they're still there, still waiting. And every night since my accident, I dream about them. They're calling for help, begging someone to listen. People need to know. Families need to know. Before you bury someone, before you cremate them, listen. Really listen. Because some of us aren't ready to go. Maria Santos, everyone. Alive because one man decided to listen to the impossible. Michael, thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for saving lives by refusing to ignore what others might dismiss as impossible. Edward, I need to get back to work. But I want your listeners to know something. If they work in hospitals, funeral homes, anywhere death is processed, pay attention. Listen, because sometimes the dead aren't really dead. They're just waiting for someone who cares enough to hear them. We're approaching 2 a.m., night owls, and I'm beginning to understand that tonight isn't just about ghost stories or supernatural experiences. It's about the fundamental question of what death really means, and whether our certainty about life and death might be dangerously wrong. Stay with us. The night is deep, the storm is strong, and the boundary between life and death has never felt more fragile.
Night owls, we've crossed into the deep hours now. The time when the veil between worlds grows thinnest, when the impossible starts to feel inevitable. I've been doing this show for 7 years, but tonight feels different, like we've opened something that was meant to stay closed. The stories keep coming, emails, phone calls, even more handwritten notes that seem to appear on my desk without explanation, each one more disturbing than the last. Each one confirming what I'm beginning to suspect. The world of death and dying is far stranger than any of us imagined. This letter arrived in the strangest way. About 20 minutes ago, I heard a scratching sound at the window. Not the sound of branches in the wind, but something more deliberate. When I went to investigate, I found this envelope tucked under the window frame, as if someone had slipped it through a crack that shouldn't exist. The envelope is addressed simply to The Voice in the Dark and postmarked, well, that's impossible. The postmark says October 31st, 1987, 38 years ago. The letter is from someone who signs himself as Ezra Whitmore, groundskeeper, Willowbrook Cemetery. The paper smells of old earth and something else. Something I can't quite identify. Let me read you what Ezra wrote. To whoever finds this letter, my name is Ezra Whitmore, and I am the groundskeeper at Willowbrook Cemetery in Salem County, New Jersey. I have held this position for 43 years, and in that time, I have learned secrets that no living man should know. I am writing this in 1987 on Halloween night because I believe this will be my last Halloween among the living. The dead have been calling to me more insistently lately, and I fear my time as guardian of their rest is coming to an end. But before I join them, I must tell someone what I have witnessed in this place, what I have learned about the nature of death and the responsibilities of those who tend to the departed. Willowbrook Cemetery was established in 1847, built on land that was once a colonial settlement. The original graves are simple affairs, plain headstones marking the resting places of farmers, craftsmen, their wives and children. Good people who lived hard lives and died believing they had earned their eternal rest. But they were wrong. I began working at Willowbrook in 1944, just after returning from the war in Europe. I had seen enough death on foreign battlefields to last several lifetimes, and I thought that tending to the peacefully dead would be a respite from the violence I had witnessed. For the first few years it was. Quiet work, maintaining the grounds, ensuring that families could visit their loved ones in a place of beauty and tranquility. I took pride in keeping the grass trim, the headstones clean, the pathways clear. But in 1947, on the cemetery's centennial, something changed. It began with sounds. At first, I dismissed them as the normal settling of old graves, the expansion and contraction of soil with changing temperatures. But these sounds were different, rhythmic, deliberate, scratching. The scratching started in the oldest section of the cemetery, where the colonial graves lay beneath weathered stones. It was loudest at night, particularly on nights when the moon was dark and the air was still. I told myself it was animals, raccoons perhaps, or feral cats looking for shelter. But when I investigated, I found something that made my blood run cold. The scratching was coming from inside the graves, not all of them, only specific ones, and always the same ones, night after night. The first grave to exhibit this phenomenon belonged to Constance Hale, buried in 1851. According to her headstone, she had been 23 years old when she died. The county records indicated that she had succumbed to consumption after a brief illness. But the scratching from her grave told a different story. I began researching the burial records, going back through church documents and family histories. What I found was disturbing. Constance Hale had not died of consumption. She had been buried alive. In 1851, medical knowledge was primitive. People who fell into deep comas from illness, injury, or poisoning were often mistaken for dead. Constance had apparently been one of these unfortunate souls, buried while still alive and left to die slowly in the confines of her coffin. But that was over 90 years ago. What was making the scratching sounds now? I decided to investigate. On a moonless night in November 1947, I brought a shovel to Constance Hale's grave and began to dig. What I found defied all logic and reason. The coffin was 6 feet down, as expected, but when I pried open the lid, I discovered that it was empty. No body, no bones, no sign that anyone had ever been buried there, but carved into the inside of the coffin lid, in letters that appeared fresh despite the passage of nearly a century, were words: "Help me, still here, still scratching." I stared at those words for a long time, trying to understand what they meant. Then I heard it, a voice calling from somewhere beneath me, deeper in the earth. "Thank you for opening the lid. I've been trying to get out for so long." The voice was female, young, with the accent of someone from the mid-1800s. It was coming from directly below the coffin, as if someone were buried even deeper. "Constance?" I called down. "Is that you?" "Yes. I've been waiting for someone to hear me, to help me find my way out of this place. But you've been dead for almost 100 years. "Dead?" She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Mr. Whitmore, I was never dead. I was buried alive, yes, but I didn't die in that coffin. I escaped." "Escaped? How?" "The same way all of us escaped. We clawed our way out, through the wood, through the earth, up to the surface. But when we got there, we found that the world had changed. Decades had passed. Everyone we knew was gone." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "All of you?" "Oh, yes, Mr. Whitmore. There are dozens of us here, all buried alive, all escaped, all trapped between the world of the living and the world of the dead. We can't move on because we never truly died, but we can't return to life because too much time has passed." Over the following weeks, I spoke with others. The voices came from different graves, different time periods. All of them told similar stories: premature burial, escape from their coffins, emergence into a world that no longer recognized them. "What do you need?" I asked Constance one night. "How can I help?" "We need to be remembered," she said. "We need someone to acknowledge that we existed, that our deaths were not natural, that we suffered. As long as people believe we died peacefully, we remain trapped here." I began documenting their stories, researching each case, finding evidence of the circumstances that led to their premature burial. It was heartbreaking work. Disease, accidents, poisoning. So many reasons why someone might fall into a coma deep enough to mimic death. But as I worked, something wonderful began to happen. As I uncovered the truth about each person's story, their voices grew fainter, calmer, and eventually they stopped calling to me altogether. It took me 40 years to document all of their stories. 40 years of nighttime conversations with the trapped souls of Willowbrook Cemetery. One by one, I helped them find peace by ensuring their true stories were known. Constance Hale was the last. Just last week, I finished researching her case and updating her burial record
to reflect the truth about her death. That night, she spoke to me one final time. "Thank you, Ezra. You've given us what we needed most, acknowledgement of our suffering and recognition of our humanity. We can rest now." And the cemetery has been quiet ever since. But I am tired, my friend. 43 years of carrying these secrets, of serving as a bridge between the trapped and the living, has taken its toll. I feel the dead calling to me now, not for help, but in welcome. I leave this letter as a record of what I learned and as a warning for whoever takes my place. The dead do not always rest easily. Sometimes they need an advocate among the living, someone who will listen to their stories and ensure that the truth is told. If you work among the dead, in cemeteries, funeral homes, morgues, remember this: every person who dies has a story, and sometimes those stories aren't finished when the heart stops beating. Listen to them, help them, give them the peace they deserve. Ezra Whitmore, October 31st, 1987. Ezra Whitmore died on November 1st, 1987. I looked it up during a commercial break. He was found in Willowbrook Cemetery the morning after Halloween, sitting peacefully beneath an old oak tree with a smile on his face. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, brought on by natural causes. But the strange thing is, according to cemetery records, Ezra Whitmore was never buried. His body disappeared from the morgue the night before his scheduled funeral. No explanation was ever found. And there's something else, something I can't quite explain. When I picked up Ezra's letter tonight, my hands were clean, but now there's dirt under my fingernails, old dirt, the kind that smells of earth that's been undisturbed for decades. WNMR, this is Edward. Mr. Cronkite, my name is Margaret Bellwether. I'm the current administrator of Willowbrook Cemetery. Margaret, thank you for calling. I just finished reading Ezra Whitmore's letter on the air. Yes, I've been listening. And I felt you should know something about that letter. What's that? Every year, on Halloween night, we find letters from Ezra on various graves throughout the cemetery. Always dated 1987, always in the same handwriting, always telling the stories of people who were buried alive. How is that possible? We don't know. But what I can tell you is this: every story in those letters has checked out. Every single case of premature burial that Ezra documented has been verified through historical research. He helped over 60 people find peace by telling their stories. Mr. Cronkite, what you're doing tonight, it's the same work Ezra did, giving voice to those who can't speak for themselves, making sure their stories are heard and remembered. But Margaret, Ezra died almost 40 years ago. Did he? Or did he simply join the people he spent his life helping? All I know is that every Halloween, new letters appear, and every letter helps someone find peace. Be careful tonight, Mr. Cronkite. When you give voice to the dead, sometimes they start listening back. Folks, I don't know what to make of that conversation, or of Ezra's letter, or of the dirt that somehow appeared on my hands. But I'm beginning to understand something about tonight's show. We're not just sharing stories, we're serving as witnesses. We're ensuring that the experiences of people who work with the dead are acknowledged and remembered. And maybe, just maybe, we're helping some restless souls find the peace they've been searching for. We have more stories to share, night owls, more voices from the boundary between life and death. The storm is at its peak, the hour is dark, and the dead have more to say. Stay with us. We're not done yet. Night owls, we're deep in the heart of darkness now. The witching hour has come and gone, and we've entered territory that I'm not sure any radio show has explored before. The stories we've shared tonight have created something, a resonance, a frequency that seems to be calling out to every soul that works in the spaces between life and death. I have to tell you something that's been happening as we've progressed through these stories. The temperature in this studio has been dropping steadily. When I started the show at 10 o'clock, it was a comfortable 72 degrees. Now I can see my breath when I speak. But it's not just the cold. There's a presence here now, multiple presences. I can feel them gathering, drawn by the stories we've shared, the voices we've given to experiences that are usually kept secret. And here's another message. This one is different from the others. The paper is damp, as if it's been buried in wet earth. The handwriting is careful but shaky, written with what appears to be mud rather than ink. The message reads, "Edward, my name is Frank Delacroix. I'm calling from a payphone outside St. Mary's Hospital. I've been listening all night, driving around the city, unable to go home. I work at Hart Island, and after hearing these stories, I think it's time someone knew about the forgotten ones. The people no one claims, no one mourns, no one remembers. Can I tell you about the Potter's Field?" "Frank, if that's you pulling into the parking lot, come on in. Hart Island. That's New York's Potter's Field, isn't it? Where they bury the unclaimed dead?" "That's right, Edward. Hart Island, where the city buries the people society forgets. The homeless, the indigent, the mentally ill, the immigrants without families. I've been burying the unwanted dead for 12 years. Frank, please sit down. Tell us about your work." "Edward, what I do, it's not like working at a regular cemetery. Hart Island isn't a place where people come to visit their loved ones, where flowers are left on graves or headstones are polished. It's a place where society's failures are buried and forgotten. I'm part of a crew that buries approximately 1,000 people per year in mass graves. Plain pine boxes, no ceremonies, no mourners. We stack them in trenches, cover them with dirt, and mark the location with a number. That's it. No names on headstones, no lasting memorial, just a number in a ledger. But the thing about the forgotten dead, Edward, they don't stay quiet. They don't rest easy when no one mourns for them, when no one remembers their names or tells their stories. Hart Island has been the city's Potter's Field since 1869. Over 1 million people are buried there, making it one of the largest cemeteries in the world. Most folks don't even know it exists, tucked away on a small island in the East River. I started working there in 2013 after the recession cost me my construction job. It wasn't a career choice, just a way to pay the bills. The city was hiring, and I needed work. I thought it would be temporary. The work is hard, physically demanding. We use heavy machinery to dig the trenches, but the actual burial process is done by hand. Each body in its pine box, lowered carefully into the earth. It's respectful work, even if it's not ceremonial. For the first few years, it was just a job. Sad, sometimes depressing, but routine. We'd get bodies from hospitals, nursing homes, the medical examiner's office, people who died alone, without family or friends to claim them, people whose stories ended in anonymity. But in 2016, something changed. It started with whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind coming off the East River. Hart Island is exposed, windy, especially in the winter. But these weren't natural sounds.
They were voices, dozens of voices, all talking at once, too quiet to understand individual words, but loud enough to know that someone was speaking. The whispers were strongest near the newer burial sites where we'd recently interred the unclaimed dead. And they were most audible during the early morning hours just before dawn, when the night shift was ending and the day shift hadn't yet arrived. I mentioned the sounds to my supervisor, Tommy Ricci. He'd been working on the island for 23 years, longer than anyone else. "Yeah," he said, "you hear them too now. Means you've been here long enough to start listening." "Listening to what?" "The stories, Frank. All those people we bury, they got stories. Problems is, nobody ever heard them when they were alive, and nobody's listening now that they're dead." Tommy told me that every worker who'd spent significant time on Hart Island eventually started hearing the whispers, the voices of people who'd lived and died in obscurity, trying to share their experiences with anyone who would listen. "What do they want?" I asked. "Same thing everybody wants," Tommy said. "To be remembered, to have their lives matter to someone." Over the following months, I started paying closer attention to the whispers. Gradually, I began to distinguish individual voices from the collective murmur. And what I heard broke my heart. There was an elderly woman named Rose, who had been a seamstress in the garment district for 40 years. She'd died alone in a nursing home with no family to claim her body. Her voice was soft, refined, and she talked about the beautiful dresses she'd made for Broadway shows. There was a young man named Carlos who had come to New York from El Salvador seeking a better life. He'd worked as a dishwasher in restaurants throughout Queens, sending money home to his family. He died of pneumonia in a hospital emergency room, with no identification and no way to contact his relatives. There was a woman named Marie, who had been a teacher in the Bronx for 30 years before mental illness destroyed her life. She ended up homeless, living in shelters and on the streets, until she died of exposure during a particularly harsh winter. Each voice told me their story. Not the story of how they died, but the story of how they lived, their dreams, their accomplishments, their love for families they'd left behind or lost touch with. And I realized that Tommy was right. These people didn't want to be forgotten. They wanted someone to know that their lives had meaning, that they had mattered to someone somewhere. So I started writing down their stories. During my breaks, during the quiet hours before dawn, I would sit near the burial sites and listen, really listen, and I would record what they told me. Rose told me about the wedding dress she'd made for her own daughter, who had died in a car accident in 1987. She'd kept the dress for 30 years, hoping to find another young woman who could wear it, but she never did. Carlos told me about the letters he'd written to his mother, but never sent, because he was ashamed that he hadn't become successful in America. He'd saved them in a shoebox in his apartment, along with photographs of his family. Marie told me about the students she'd taught, how proud she was when they graduated, how she'd kept newspaper clippings of their accomplishments, even after her own life fell apart. For 2 years, I documented the stories of the forgotten dead, filled notebooks with their experiences, their regrets, their love for people they'd left behind. But then something wonderful started happening. As I wrote down each person's story, their voice would grow quieter, calmer, and eventually they would stop whispering altogether. It was as if the act of recording their experiences, of acknowledging their humanity, was giving them the peace they needed to rest. Last month, I had documented the stories of over 300 people buried on Hart Island, 300 lives that would have been completely forgotten if someone hadn't taken the time to listen. But there was one voice that I couldn't quite hear clearly.
an older man who seemed to be trying to communicate from one of the older sections of the cemetery. His voice was fainter than the others, as if he'd been calling out for much longer. I spent weeks trying to understand what he was saying, sitting near his burial site during the pre-dawn hours. Finally, last Tuesday, his voice came through clearly. "My name is Robert Morrison," he said. "I was buried here in 1987, but I don't belong here. I had a family. I had people who loved me, but they never knew what happened to me." I researched Robert Morrison's case during my off hours, found records indicating that he'd been a veteran of the Vietnam War, homeless for several years before his death. He'd been found in Central Park, apparently died of exposure with no identification. But as I dug deeper, I discovered something disturbing. Robert Morrison had a family in New Jersey, a wife and 2 children who had been searching for him for years. He'd suffered from PTSD after the war, had disappeared during a particularly difficult episode, but his family had never stopped looking for him. They'd filed missing person reports, hired private investigators, even appeared on television shows about missing family members. But somehow, when Robert died in New York, the system failed to connect him with his family. He'd been buried as a John Doe in 1987, while his wife and children spent 38 years wondering what had happened to him. I contacted the family through the missing person database. The conversation was heartbreaking. Robert's wife, Catherine, was now 73 years old. His children were in their 50s, with children of their own. "We never stopped looking for him," Catherine told me through tears. We knew something terrible had happened, but we needed to know. We needed to be able to say goodbye. I arranged for Robert's remains to be exhumed and returned to his family. Last week, Robert Morrison was reburied in Cedar Lawn Cemetery in New Jersey, surrounded by the people who had loved him and mourned him for nearly 4 decades. That night, for the first time since 2016, Hart Island was completely quiet. No whispers, no voices calling out from the graves. Just the sound of wind and water. But the silence didn't last. 2 days ago, I heard a new voice. A woman who said her name was Dorothy, buried just last month. She told me she had a grandson in California who didn't know she was dead, who was probably still sending letters to her old address. And I realized that my work on Hart Island isn't finished. It may never be finished. As long as people die alone and forgotten, as long as families lose touch with loved ones, there will be voices calling out from the potter's field, voices that need someone to listen, someone to remember their stories, someone to help them find their way home. Frank, what you've described, it's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. The idea that you've become a bridge between the forgotten dead and the families still searching for them. It's not just a job anymore, Edward. It's a calling. Those people trusted me with their stories, and I have a responsibility to make sure those stories reach the people who need to hear them. WNMR, this is Edward. Mr. Cronkite, this is Catherine Morrison. I'm calling from New Jersey. Catherine? Robert Morrison's wife. Yes, I've been listening to your show tonight, and when I heard Frank telling Robert's story, I had to call. Frank, I want to thank you again. Not just for finding Robert, but for listening to him, for caring about someone that society had forgotten. Mrs. Morrison, it was an honor to help bring Robert home. But there's something else, Catherine continues. Since Robert was reburied last week, I've been having dreams where he's happy, at peace, surrounded by other people who look lost but not lost anymore. In the dreams, Robert is helping them, teaching them how to find their families, how to send messages to the people they left behind. It's like he's become a guide for other lost souls. That's beautiful, Mrs. Morrison. Robert was always trying to help people, even when his own life was falling apart. Frank, I want you to know that what you're doing on that island, it's sacred work. You're not just burying the dead, you're helping them find their way home. And Mr. Cronkite, what you're doing tonight, giving these stories a voice, I think you're helping more people than you realize. Frank, thank you for sharing James's story and the stories of all the forgotten people you've helped. You've shown us that every life has value, that every person deserves to be remembered. Edward, I need to get back to the island. Dawn's coming soon, and there's always more work to do. But I want your listeners to know something. If you've lost touch with someone you love, don't give up. Keep looking. Keep hoping. Because somewhere, someone like me might be listening to their story, waiting for the chance to help them find their way home. We're approaching 3 a.m., night owls, the darkest hour of the night, when the boundary between worlds dissolves completely. The stories we've shared tonight have created something unprecedented, a network of voices from the edge of death, all connected by the simple desire to be heard and remembered. But we're not done yet. The dead, it seems, have saved their most profound revelations for the final hours before dawn. Stay with us, night owls. The night may be ending, but the real mystery is just beginning. Night owls, something extraordinary is happening here tonight. What began as a simple radio show about paranormal experiences has transformed into something far more significant. We've become a conduit, a meeting place for the living and the dead, a forum where the untold stories of death workers are finally being heard. The voices outside are no longer whispers. They're speaking clearly now, overlapping conversations of people sharing their stories, their gratitude for being remembered, their relief at finally being heard. It's as if every soul we've encountered tonight has gathered here, drawn by the simple act of acknowledgement. And here's our next story, arriving in a way that should terrify me, but somehow feels perfectly natural now. The message is brief. Edward, my name is Dr. Rachel Kim. I'm a transplant coordinator at Memorial Hospital. I've been listening all night and I can't stay silent anymore. What I've experienced with organ donors, it changes everything you think you know about death. I'm in the hospital parking lot now. May I come share what the donors have told me? Dr. Kim, please come in. Tonight has taught me that the impossible is often just another word for the truth we're not ready to accept. Mr. Cronkite, thank you for letting me come. I'm not sure how to explain what I've been experiencing. Dr. Kim, please sit down. Tell us about your work with organ donors. Edward, I coordinate organ donations at one of the largest transplant centers in the region. When someone dies in circumstances that make them eligible for organ donation, I work with their families to facilitate the process. It's meaningful work. One donor can save up to 8 lives through organ transplantation. But over the past year, I've discovered that the relationship between donor and recipient doesn't end with the surgery. It continues in ways that medical science can't explain or accept. I've been working in transplant coordination for 6 years. It's emotionally challenging work dealing with families at the worst moment of their lives, helping them find meaning in tragedy by giving their loved ones organs to people who desperately need them. The medical process is straightforward. Brain death is declared, the family consents to donation, we match organs with recipients based on compatibility and medical urgency, and surgical teams harvest the organs for transplantation. From a clinical standpoint, it's efficient and life-saving, but last year I started noticing something that medical textbooks don't cover. It began with a young man named Kevin Martinez. 22 years old, died in a motorcycle accident. Devastating head trauma. But his organs were perfect for donation. His heart went to a 45-year-old construction worker, his liver to a teenage girl with genetic liver disease, his kidneys to 2 different patients with renal failure. I followed up with the recipients, as I always do. Part of my job is ensuring that the transplanted organs are functioning properly and that patients are adjusting well to their new circumstances. The heart recipient, Robert Chen, was doing well physically. His new heart was strong, pumping efficiently, no signs of rejection. But during our follow-up appointment, he told me something strange. "Doctor," he said, "I've been having the most vivid dreams since the surgery. Dreams about riding a motorcycle, about working on engines, but I've never owned a motorcycle in my life, and I don't know anything about mechanical work." I assured him that vivid dreams weren't uncommon after major surgery, especially with the medications he was taking. But privately, I was intrigued. Kevin Martinez had been a motorcycle enthusiast and part-time mechanic. The liver recipient, 17-year-old Amanda Foster, reported similar experiences. She'd developed a sudden passion for Spanish music and had started speaking occasional words in Spanish, despite never studying the language. Kevin had been bilingual, Spanish and English, but it was the kidney recipient that really got my attention. Mrs. Eleanor Price, 63 years old, called me 3 weeks after her transplant. "Dr. Kim," she said, "I need to ask you something about my donor." Was he a young Hispanic man who loved his family very much? I told her that donor information was confidential, but I asked her why she was asking. "Because I keep feeling his emotions," she said. "Strong feelings of love for someone named Maria, worry about someone called Miguel. The feelings are so intense that I wake up crying sometimes." Kevin Martinez had been engaged to a woman named Maria and had a younger brother named Miguel. I started paying closer attention to recipient experiences after that. What I found was that transplant recipients frequently developed characteristics, memories, or emotional connections that corresponded to their donors' personalities. A man who received a heart from a classical musician suddenly developed an appreciation for opera. A woman who received lungs from a marathon runner began jogging daily, despite never having exercised before. A teenager who received a liver from an elderly man started preferring foods he'd never tried and developed an inexplicable knowledge of World War II history. The medical community calls this cellular memory, the controversial idea that organs retain some form of consciousness or memory from their original owners. Most doctors dismiss it as coincidence or psychological suggestion, but I began to suspect something more profound was happening. 6 months ago, I had a case that changed everything I thought I knew about organ donation. A 12-year-old girl named Sarah Chen, no relation to Robert Chen, died of a brain aneurysm. Her parents consented to donation, and her heart was transplanted into a 10-year-old boy named Timothy Walsh, who had been born with a severe heart defect. The surgery was successful, and Timothy's recovery was remarkable. His new heart functioned perfectly, and he regained energy and vitality that he'd never had before. But 2 weeks after the transplant, Timothy's mother called me with an urgent concern. "Dr. Kim," she said, "Timothy is asking about someone named Sarah." He keeps saying that Sarah wants to talk to her parents, that she has something important to tell them. I felt a chill run down my spine. Mrs. Walsh, what exactly is Timothy saying? He says Sarah is inside him, that she can feel everything he feels. And she's worried about her parents because they're blaming themselves for her death. This was impossible. Timothy had no way of knowing about Sarah Chen or her family. Donor and recipient information is strictly confidential. Mrs. Walsh, can I speak with Timothy? When Timothy came to the phone, his voice was different. Still a 10-year-old boy, but with a maturity and sadness that hadn't been there before his surgery. Dr. Kim, he said, Sarah wants me to tell her mom and dad that it wasn't their fault. She says they think they should have caught the headaches sooner, but there was no way to know. She doesn't want them to be sad. I was speechless. Sarah Chen had indeed died of a brain aneurysm that her parents blamed themselves for missing. They'd told me that Sarah had complained of headaches for a few days before her death, and they felt guilty for not taking her to the doctor sooner. Timothy, I said carefully, how do you know about Sarah's headaches? Because she remembers them. She remembers everything. And she's not gone, Dr. Kim. She's just sharing space with me now. I arranged a meeting between Timothy's family and Sarah's parents. It was highly unusual, potentially problematic from a legal standpoint, but I felt compelled to facilitate the connection. The meeting was extraordinary. Timothy, speaking in his own voice but conveying Sarah's thoughts, was able to share memories and details that only Sarah could have known. He described her bedroom, her favorite stuffed animal, conversations she'd had with her parents in the days before her death. But more importantly, he delivered messages that brought her parents immense comfort. Sarah says she loves you, Timothy told them. She says she's happy because she gets to keep living, just in a different way. And she wants you to know that she can feel how much you love her, and it makes her feel safe. Sarah's parents were initially skeptical, then amazed, then finally at peace in a way they hadn't been since their daughter's death. But the most remarkable moment came when Timothy suddenly looked directly at Sarah's mother and spoke in a voice that was distinctly different from his own, softer, more feminine, with speech patterns that matched how Sarah used to talk. "Mommy," he said, "remember the song you used to sing to me before bed? The one about the angel watching over me? Will you sing it to Timothy sometimes? It helps both of us sleep better." Sarah's mother broke down completely. The song Timothy referred to was one she'd made up herself, never sung to anyone but Sarah. There was no way Timothy could have known about it. After that meeting, I started facilitating connections between other donor families and recipients when similar experiences occurred. And they occurred more frequently than anyone in the medical community wanted to acknowledge. I documented case after case where transplant recipients developed knowledge, memories, or emotional connections that could only have come from their donors. And in many instances, the recipients served as messengers, delivering final words of love, forgiveness, or comfort to grieving families. But the most profound case happened just 2 weeks ago. A 40-year-old man named David Brennan died in a climbing accident, leaving behind a wife and twin daughters. His organs were donated to multiple recipients, including his heart, which went to a 35-year-old woman named Lisa Chen, who had been in heart failure for years. Lisa's recovery was exceptional, but a week after surgery, she began experiencing intense emotional episodes. She would suddenly break into tears, overwhelmed by feelings of love for children she'd never had and grief for a family she'd never lost. During one of these episodes, she called me. "Dr. Kim," she said through tears, "my donor, he had daughters, didn't he? Twin girls?" I couldn't confirm that information,
but I arranged for Lisa to meet with a counselor who specialized in post-transplant adjustment. During the counseling session, Lisa suddenly stopped crying and looked directly at the counselor. "David wants me to tell you something," she said, speaking in a voice that was deeper, more masculine than her own. "His name is David Brennan, and he needs to get a message to his wife Rebecca and his daughters Emma and Sophie." The counselor, Dr. Martinez, was shaken but continued the session. "What message does David want to share?" "He wants them to know that he's not really gone. That part of him is living on in Lisa, and he'll always be watching over them. And he wants Rebecca to know that it's okay for her to be happy again. He doesn't want her to spend her life grieving for him." Dr. Martinez contacted me after the session, and together we reached out to Rebecca Brennan. The conversation was difficult. Rebecca was deep in grief and initially resistant to the idea that her husband could somehow be communicating through his heart recipient. But when Lisa met Rebecca and the twins, something remarkable happened. Lisa was able to share specific memories and details about David's relationship with his family that only he could have known. She knew about inside jokes, family traditions, private moments between David and Rebecca, and most convincingly, she demonstrated knowledge of a secret language that David had developed with his daughters, a series of hand signals they used to communicate across crowded rooms or when they needed to be quiet. "Daddy taught us these signs when we were little," 8-year-old Emma said in wonder. "Nobody else knows them." Rebecca finally accepted that some part of David was indeed present in Lisa, and the message he conveyed brought her the peace she needed to begin healing. "David says he chose Lisa specifically," Rebecca told me later. "He says he knew she would take good care of his heart and help him stay connected to us." Edward, what I've learned through these experiences is that organ donation isn't just about saving lives. It's about preserving souls. The donors don't disappear when their organs are transplanted. They live on, in a very real sense, in the bodies of their recipients. And sometimes they use that connection to deliver the messages they couldn't share before they died. Messages of love, forgiveness, comfort, and hope. The medical community isn't ready to accept this reality, but I've seen it too many times to deny it. Consciousness, memory, emotion, these things aren't confined to the brain. They exist in every cell, every organ, every part of our physical being. When we donate organs, we're not just giving the gift of life. We're giving the gift of continued existence, continued connection, continued love. Dr. Kim, what you've described, it fundamentally changes how we understand death, consciousness, even the nature of identity itself. WNMR, this is Edward. Mr. Cronkite, this is Rebecca Brennan. I've been listening to Dr. Kim's story. Rebecca, how are you? I'm well, Dr. Kim, and I'm calling because I wanted your listeners to know something. What Dr. Kim shared tonight is absolutely true. David is still with us in a way that's impossible to explain but undeniable to experience. Since meeting Lisa, our whole family has felt a sense of peace that we thought we'd never have again. David may not be physically present, but his love, his protection, his guidance, those things continue through Lisa. And to the families listening who might be facing the decision about organ donation, please consider it. You're not just saving lives. You're allowing love to continue in ways that transcend death itself. Dr. Kim, thank you for sharing these incredible experiences. You've shown us that love really is stronger than death, that consciousness can survive the death of the brain, and that the connections between people can transcend the boundaries of individual bodies. Edward, I need to get back to the hospital. But I want your listeners to know that what happens in operating rooms across the country every day
It's miraculous in ways that we're only beginning to understand. The dead don't always stay dead. Sometimes they just relocate. We're approaching 4 a.m., night owls, the darkest hour before dawn, when the impossible becomes inevitable and the boundaries between life and death dissolve completely. Tonight has shown us that death is not an ending, but a transformation, that love transcends physical existence, that consciousness can survive the death of the body and continue to care for the people left behind. But we have one more story to share, one final revelation that will complete the circle we've been drawing tonight. Stay with us, night owls. The most profound truth is yet to come. Night owls, we're in the final hour before dawn, and I need to tell you something that I've been feeling throughout this entire broadcast. We're not alone in this studio. We haven't been alone for hours. Every story we've shared tonight has called forth the spirit of someone who needed their experience to be heard. They're here with us now. Marcus's Mrs. Thornfield, David's Elena Vasquez, Janet's Crematorium Souls, Dr. Chen's Miguel Garcia, the twin sisters from Thomas's funeral home, Michael's passengers, Ezra's buried alive victims, Frank's forgotten dead, Dr. Kim's organ donors, all of them, surrounding us with love and gratitude for being remembered. And now, for our penultimate story. Someone has arrived who works at the very threshold between life and death. Someone whose job is to shepherd souls through their final transition with dignity and compassion. Edward Cronkite? Her voice is warm, maternal, with the kind of gentleness that comes from years of easing suffering. My name is Helen Morrison. I'm a hospice nurse. I've been listening to your show tonight, and I felt called to share what I've learned about the moment of death itself. Helen, welcome. Tell us about your work. I've been a hospice nurse for 18 years, Edward. I specialize in end-of-life care, helping people die with dignity in their own homes, surrounded by family and love. I've been present for over 3,000 deaths, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that death is not what most people think it is. Death isn't an ending, Edward. It's a graduation, a transition from one form of existence to another, and sometimes, when conditions are right, the dying don't go alone. When I first started in hospice care, I thought my job was simply medical, managing pain, ensuring comfort, helping families navigate the practical aspects of dying. But I quickly learned that the dying often experience things that medical training doesn't prepare you for. They see people who aren't there. They have conversations with deceased relatives. They describe beautiful places that exist beyond our physical world. For years, I dismissed these as hallucinations brought on by medication, oxygen deprivation, or the brain's response to dying. I was wrong. The first time I truly understood what was happening occurred 5 years ago with a patient named Robert Chen, not related to any of the other Chens you've heard about tonight. Robert was dying of pancreatic cancer, spending his final weeks at home with his wife and adult children. Robert had been unconscious for 2 days when I arrived for my evening check. His family was gathered around his bed, taking turns holding his hand and sharing memories. It was peaceful, exactly the kind of death everyone hopes for. But around midnight, Robert suddenly opened his eyes and looked toward the corner of the room. "Dad," he said clearly, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You came to get me." Robert's father had died 15 years earlier, but Robert was looking at that corner with the joy of someone seeing a beloved family member after a long separation. "I'm ready,"
Robert continued, speaking to someone only he could see. But first, I need to tell them something. He turned to look at his wife. Maria, you need to know that I'm not in pain anymore. And where I'm going, it's beautiful. Dad says it's everything we hoped it would be. Linda was crying, but she managed to ask, "What does it look like, sweetheart?"
Like home, William said simply. Like the most perfect version of home you can imagine. And everyone's there, Linda. Everyone who went before us. They're all waiting. William spoke with his family for another 20 minutes, delivering messages of love and reassurance. He told his son to take care of Linda, told his daughter to pursue her dreams of becoming a teacher, shared specific memories with each grandchild. But the most remarkable moment came when he looked back toward the corner where he'd first seen his father. He's not alone, William told his family. There are others with him, other people who are here to help with the transition. It's like a welcoming committee. William described seeing several people he didn't recognize, all standing with his father, all radiating warmth and love. "Who are they?" Linda asked. "I think—" William paused, his face lighting up with understanding. "I think they're the other people who died here, in this house. People who understand what it's like to leave this place and want to help others make the same journey." The house had been built in 1923, and William's family had lived there for only 10 years. But according to county records, several previous owners had died in the house over the decades. William passed away peacefully an hour later, his hand in Linda's, his face serene and almost smiling. That experience changed how I understood my role in hospice care. I began paying closer attention to what dying patients reported seeing and hearing, and I discovered that William's experience wasn't unique. Most of my patients in their final hours reported seeing deceased family members who had come to guide them through their transition, but many also described seeing other people, strangers who had died in the same location and returned to help new souls navigate their departure from the physical world. I started researching the history of the homes where my patients died. What I found was extraordinary. In nearly every case where a patient reported seeing helpful strangers during their dying process, those strangers corresponded to people who had actually died in that location years or decades earlier. Mrs. B. Dorothy Walsh was dying in a house where the previous owner, an elderly man named George Patterson, had passed away in 1987. During Dorothy's final hours, she described a kind gentleman who was helping her understand what was happening. "He says his name is George," Dorothy told her daughter. "He used to live here, and he stayed to help people who die in his house. He says it's easier to let go when you have someone who understands the journey." I researched George Patterson and found that he had indeed been the previous owner of Dorothy's house. According to his obituary, he had been known for his kindness and his dedication to helping others throughout his life. A young man named Peter Marshall was dying in a hospital room where, according to staff records, dozens of patients had passed away over the years. Peter described seeing a group of people in hospital gowns who were there to welcome him. "They all died here too," Peter explained to his parents, "but they chose to stay and help other kids who are scared about dying. They say it's not scary at all, that it's actually wonderful." Over and over, I witnessed dying patients receiving comfort and guidance from souls who had made the same transition in the same location. It was as if death created a network of compassionate spirits who remained earthbound specifically to ease the fears of those following in their footsteps. But the most profound case occurred just 6 months ago. I was caring for a 7-year-old girl named Emma Foster. Emma was dying of a brain tumor, and her parents had chosen to keep her at home for her final weeks. Emma's house was relatively new, built only 5 years earlier, so I didn't expect her to report seeing previous residents who had died there. But during her last night, Emma began talking to someone her parents couldn't see. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" her mother asked. "The other children," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "They come from different places, but they all know what it's like to die when you're little. They're here to show me how to do it without being scared." Emma described seeing children of various ages, all of whom had died young from different causes: cancer, accidents, illnesses. They weren't connected to her house or even her city, but they had come together to help another child make the transition. "They say dying is like going to sleep and waking up in the most beautiful place you can imagine," Emma told her parents. "And all the other kids who died before us, they're there waiting to play and have fun forever." Emma passed away peacefully, surrounded by her family and, according to her, a group of children who had transformed death from something frightening into an adventure shared with friends. After Emma's death, I began to understand that the network of helping spirits isn't limited by location or time. Love transcends all boundaries, and the souls who have passed on remain connected to those who are still living, ready to provide comfort and guidance when it's needed most. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of my work is what I've learned about the moment of death itself. In popular culture, we often imagine death as a sudden event. One moment alive, the next moment gone. But in my experience, death is a process, a gradual transition during which consciousness expands rather than contracts. Many of my patients report experiencing a period of what I call expanded awareness just before they die. They can see and hear things beyond normal perception. They can sense the emotions of family members, understand conversations happening in other rooms, even perceive events occurring at distant locations. Last month, a patient named Carl Brennan was dying at home, while his wife Rebecca was at the hospital with one of their daughters, who had been in a minor car accident. During Carl's final hour, he suddenly became agitated. "Anna's okay," he told his mother-in-law, who was staying with him. "Tell Rebecca that Anna's going to be fine. The doctors are worried about a concussion, but the tests will be negative." Carl had no way of knowing about his daughter's accident or the doctor's concerns, but when Rebecca called an hour later to update the family, she confirmed that Carl's information had been completely accurate. "It's like he could see everything," Rebecca told me later. As if dying gave him access to a broader perspective on reality. This expanded awareness seems to allow dying patients to provide comfort and closure to their families in ways that wouldn't otherwise be possible. They share information that helps resolve conflicts, express forgiveness for old wounds, and offer reassurance about the future. But most importantly, they consistently report that death is not something to fear. Without exception, my patients who have had conscious death experiences describe the transition as beautiful, peaceful, and filled with love. "I wish I could show you what I'm seeing," a patient named Maria Santos told her family during her final moments. "It's so beautiful, and everyone is so happy. You don't need to be sad for me. I'm going to the most wonderful place." Edward, after 18 years of hospice work, I can tell you with absolute certainty that consciousness survives physical death. The love we share with others creates bonds that transcend mortality, and the souls who have passed on remain actively involved in helping their loved ones navigate both life and death. Death isn't an ending, it's a transformation. And none of us make that journey alone. Helen, your work, your presence at the threshold between worlds, you've given us the most beautiful perspective on death I've ever heard. The idea that dying is guided, supported, surrounded by love. WNMR, this is Edward. Edward, this is everyone you've shared tonight. Marcus and David and Janet and Dr. Chen and Thomas and Michael and Ezra and Frank and Dr. Kim and Helen and all the souls whose stories you've told. You're all together. We've been together all night. Edward, brought together by the simple act of being heard, being remembered, being honored for the work we do and the experiences we've had. But there's something more, Edward. Something we all need to tell you. You're not just a radio host, Edward. You're not just telling stories. You're serving as a bridge between worlds, just like all of us do in our work. You're helping the living understand death and helping the dead communicate with the living. Tonight has created something new, a network of understanding that spans the boundary between life and death, and it's not ending when your show ends. What do you mean? Every person who has listened tonight, every family member who has called in, every soul whose story has been shared, we're all connected now. The love, the understanding, the acceptance of death as a transition rather than an ending. It's spreading. Fear of death is one of humanity's greatest sources of suffering. But tonight, we've shown that death is surrounded by love, guided by compassion, and connected to life in ways that transcend physical existence. The sun is rising, Edward, but the network we've created tonight will continue. Every funeral director, every hospice worker, every person who cares for the dying, they'll know they're not alone. They'll know their work is sacred. Thank you, Edward Cronkite. Thank you for giving us voice. Thank you for helping the world understand that love is stronger than death. It's time for the final story, Edward. Time for you to complete the circle. Remember us, Edward. Remember that death is not the enemy. It's just another beginning. Night owls. We've reached the hour before dawn, the moment when darkness gives way to light, when night surrenders to day, when the impossible becomes possible. One more story awaits. One final revelation that will complete our journey through the mystery of death and love. Stay with us for the end that is really a beginning. Night owls. We stand at the threshold of dawn, at the end of a journey that has taken us deep into the heart of mortality, and emerged with the understanding that death is not the opposite of life, but its continuation in a different form. I need to tell you something that I've been avoiding all night, something that explains why this show exists, why I chose this subject, why I was chosen to be the voice that brought these stories together. My name is Edward Cronkite, and 8 years ago, I died. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. I died clinically, medically, completely. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, I was as dead as every person whose story we've shared tonight. It was a heart attack. Massive, sudden, unsurvivable, according to the emergency room doctors who worked on me. I was alone in my apartment, collapsed on the kitchen floor, found by my landlord who had come to check on a water leak. By the time the paramedics arrived, I had been without a heartbeat for over 6 minutes. They worked on me for another 20 minutes before declaring me deceased. The time of death was officially recorded as 11:47 p.m. on October 31st, 2017. But death, as we've learned tonight, is not always permanent. I remember everything about those 4.5 minutes, not as a near-death experience, but as actual death. I was conscious, aware, but existing in a state that transcended physical reality. I found myself in a place that defied description, not the traditional heaven or hell of religious imagination, but something far more personal and profound. It was a space where every person I had ever loved was present, where every act of kindness I had witnessed was made visible, where every story of human connection and compassion was preserved like books in an infinite library. And I wasn't alone. There were others there, thousands upon thousands of souls who had crossed over but chosen to remain connected to the physical world. Some were recent arrivals, still adjusting to their new state of existence. Others had been there for decades, centuries even, serving as guides and teachers for those still making the transition. But the most remarkable group were those who had specifically chosen to remain earthbound, to help people understand that death was not something to fear. They were the ones who spoke to dying patients in hospitals, the ones who comforted families at funerals, the ones who provided signs and messages to the grieving. They were love made manifest, consciousness dedicated to easing the suffering of the living. And they offered me a choice. "Edward," they said, "you can stay here with us. You can rest, explore, experience the fullness of what comes after physical life. Or you can return to the world and serve as a voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves." I asked what that would mean. Return to life, but with the knowledge of what lies beyond death. Use that knowledge to help others understand that their work with the dying is sacred, that their experiences with the departed are real, that love truly does transcend mortality. I thought about my life before the heart attack. I had been a radio producer, working on commercial programming, focused on ratings and revenue, successful by conventional standards, but spiritually empty. If I return, I asked, what would I do? Tell stories, they said. Give voice to the experiences that people are afraid to share. Create a space where the impossible can be acknowledged as truth. Help the world understand that death is not an ending, but a transformation. I chose to return. The doctors called it a miracle. After being declared dead for nearly 5 minutes, my heart suddenly started beating again, strong, steady, healthier than it had been in years. The damage from the heart attack was completely gone, as if it had never happened. But I was different. I could sense things that others couldn't, feel the presence of souls who remained connected to the physical world, understand, on a level deeper than knowledge, that consciousness survives bodily death. I left my job at the commercial radio station and started WNNMR, Nocturnal Mysteries Radio. For 8 years, I've been sharing stories of the unexplained, the supernatural, the impossible. But I've been building toward tonight. Tonight was always the goal, the gathering of voices from the death industry, the sharing of experiences that prove consciousness survives physical death, the creation of a network of understanding that spans the boundary between life and death. Every story we've shared tonight has been true. Every phone call, every email, every handwritten note that appeared on my desk, all of it happened exactly as I described. But there's something more that you need to know. Every person who shared their story tonight is connected to my own death experience. Marcus, David, Janet, Dr. Chen, Thomas, Michael, Ezra, Frank,
Dr. Kim, Helen. They were all there in that space beyond physical reality when I died. They were part of the group that offered me the choice to return. We've been working together for 8 years, each in our own profession, each serving as a bridge between the living and the dead. Tonight was our moment to come together, to share our experiences publicly, to help the world understand that death is surrounded by love and guided by compassion. WNMR, this is Edward. Hello, Edward. This is you, the you that died 7 years ago and chose to remain in that place beyond physical reality. Hello. I've been waiting for this call. Have you fulfilled your purpose? Have you accomplished what you returned to do? I think so. Tonight has shown that love transcends death, that consciousness survives bodily termination, that those who work with the dying are engaged in sacred work. And what have you learned about your own journey? I've learned that death is not a destination, but a doorway. That choosing to return to life was not about avoiding death, but about serving life. That the stories we've shared tonight will help countless people understand that their experiences with the departed are real and valid. And now? Now it's time to complete the circle. My work here is finished. The network of understanding has been established. The bridge between worlds has been built. The listeners need to understand that this isn't an ending, Edward. It's a transformation. Your radio show will continue, but you won't be physically present to host it. Others will take up the work inspired by what you've accomplished tonight. How will they know? How will people understand what happened here? Because you're going to tell them right now. Night owls, I need to share something with you that will be difficult to understand but essential to accept. What happened here tonight was more than a radio show. It was a gathering of souls who chose to serve as bridges between life and death. We came together to share the truth about mortality, consciousness, and love. My part in this work is now complete. In a few moments, as the sun rises fully over the Pennsylvania woods, I will join the others in that place beyond physical reality. My body will be found peacefully at this desk, with no signs of distress or suffering. But the work will continue. The network of understanding we've created tonight will spread. Every person who works with the dying will know that they're not alone, that their experiences are real, that their work is sacred. To Marcus at the funeral home, to David the embalmer, to Janet at the crematorium, to Dr. Chen in the morgue, to Thomas, the funeral director, to Michael, the transport driver, to Ezra in the cemetery, to Frank at the potter's field, to Dr. Kim with the organ donors, to Helen, the hospice nurse. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for serving as bridges between worlds. To the families who called in tonight, who heard the voices of their loved ones and found comfort in knowing that death is not separation, but transformation. Carry that knowledge with you. Share it with others who are grieving. Help them understand that love transcends mortality. And to you, my faithful night owls, who have listened to these impossible stories and found truth in them, remember what you've learned tonight. Remember that consciousness survives physical death. Remember that those who work with the dying are engaged in sacred service. Remember that love is stronger than death. The sun is rising, marking the end of our journey through the dark hours, where the impossible becomes inevitable. But this ending is also a beginning. The stories we've shared tonight will continue to spread, to comfort, to heal.
Death is not the enemy. It's just another form of love. This is Edward Cronkite, signing off from WNMR, Nocturnal Mysteries Radio. To all the night owls out there, remember, the darkness is not empty. It's full of love, full of stories, full of souls who remain connected to us through the bonds that death cannot break. Until we meet again in that place where all stories end and all love continues,